Hello and good morning to everyone. A warm welcome to Series A of the Open Banking Summit, the Open Banking Ecosystem GCC Summit. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedules to join us today and on Wednesday, 23rd of June. With the UK leading the adoption for open banking in Europe, following the revision of PSD2 and Singapore at the forefront for the APAC region, the disruptive concept of sharing customer data with fintechs and regulated third-party vendors to drive innovation and superior customer service is fast gaining traction in the GCC's banking and financial sector. With Bahrain leading the way with its phase 1 implementation of open banking regulation in December 2019, and Saudi Arabia closely on the heels with the aim to go live with the regulatory mandate by the first half of 2022, and UAE and Kuwait expected to follow suit, the overarching question becomes, are the GCC banks prepared for the new wave? And what is the cost of not being ready? To delve deeper into the various facets of successful open banking adoption and implementation, we have structured a day focusing on GCC as a region as a whole through a series of panel discussions, keynotes, and interviews. And as Saudi Arabia aims to launch open banking regulation for the kingdom by early 2022, we are hosting an exclusive KSA Day on Wednesday, 23rd of June to adequately prepare and position the Saudi bankers for the upcoming regulatory mandate. It's time to take the big moves towards successfully navigating uncertainty, recapturing growth, and leveraging on emerging opportunities. And before we begin our session, I'd like to share some house rules to keep in mind during the webinar. Please ensure that your microphone is kept on mute at all times and video is turned off. All participants can post their questions in the Q&A section given down below, and the questions will be addressed by our speakers with a dedicated Q&A. The recording for the webinar will be shared by email with all the registered attendees who've joined us today. Feel free to share details of the webinar, learnings, video clips all over social media, and don't forget to tag us at Q&A International and hashtag Open Banking. If you experience any difficulties with login or sound, please try to log out and log back in again. And if the problem persists, then please reach out to Varsha and she'll be happy to assist. And at the end of the webinar, you stand a chance to win a surprise gift hamper. So make sure that you stay with us till the very end to win a luxurious gift hamper with goodies from some amazing brands. Now, before we start our session, we'd like to understand from our audience on their opinion on some of the key industry trends. We have a few poll questions ready for you. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to display these poll questions, and all we'd request you to do is to choose your answers, click submit, and that's about it. So you see a poll tab at the bottom of your screen. That's where the poll questions are going to lie. So can I please request my team to launch the poll? There we have it. So you have the poll questions right in front of you on your screens. It's a very simple process. It's a multiple choice question format. So you need to pick your answer and then click submit at the bottom, and that's about it. Your answers will be recorded and we're going to be sharing that shortly. So the questions are as follows. Firstly, what according to you is paramount for successful open banking implementation in the GCC? Is it creating awareness among primary stakeholders on the benefits of open banking? Is it comprehensive regulatory framework, mandates and legislations? Is it end-to-end digital architecture for banks? Or is it collaborations with fintechs and third-party providers, which is TPPs, or do you think it is the availability of experienced and skilled professionals in the region, or you think it's all of the above? So you can cast your vote right now for the choice which you feel is the best for this question. Second question is, do you see open banking offer a more level playing field for fintechs, SMEs, and other players in the financial services sector? Is it yes, no, maybe, or can't say? The third question is, which of the below statements, according to you, reflect the most probable outcome of open banking in the next 5 years? So it is a pretty futuristic question that we're looking at. So the statements are as follows. Is it banks evolving to become digital ecosystems, offering own and third-party banking and non-banking products and services to their own customers and other financial services organizations? Or is it reshaping of the financial ecosystem with incumbents losing market share to challenger banks and big techs on payment and other financial services? Is it heightened risk of cyber attacks from consumer data made available to fintechs and TPPs? Or do you think it's all of the above statements? The fourth question is a rather simple one and a little different from the industry specific questions that we have. So which is, would you like to attend an open banking face-to-face event in the UAE? Now, we know that live events are quite possible and they've made a comeback in the region, in the UAE specifically. So would you want to have a live event on the same subject that we're discussing? Yes, no. If yes, which month do you think is the best for conducting a live in-person event? Is it September, October, November, or December? So these are simple questions and we see the responses coming in. So keep that going. For any of our attendees who have just joined us, there is a poll launched on your screen. You can see the questions are live right now. These are really 5 simple MCQ questions. Let's give it about 30 more seconds for all of you to cast your responses, and then we're going to show you what the results look like. 15 more seconds before we close the poll. So in case some of you have still joined us, let me remind you, there's a poll that's live on your screens right now. 5 simple questions, multiple choice. Go ahead, choose your responses, and then we're going to show you the results. So we have about 2 seconds, 1, and that's it. It's time to close the poll. So thank you so much for sharing your responses with us. Can I please request my team to kindly publish the results so we can show it to our attendees and we can all have a quick discussion about how it looks like from your end. So there you are now able to see the results on your screens. So when it comes to the first question, which is what, according to you, is paramount for successful open banking implementation in the GCC, 69% of the attendees say it's all of the above. 6% say it's to do with comprehensive regulatory framework, mandates, and legislations. And 2% feel it's about creating awareness among primary stakeholders. For the second question, do you see open banking offer a more level playing field for fintechs, SMEs, and other players? 73% of you say yes, 19% of you say maybe, and 4% is an equal amount divided between ones who cannot say at this stage and the ones who say no. The third question, which of the below statements, according to you, reflect the most probable outcome of open banking in the next 5 years? 62% have voted for all of the above. So you feel all the statements shared are going to be prime when it comes to open banking and the future of open banking in the next 5 years. Would you like to attend an open banking face-to-face event in the UAE? 69% say yes, so we shall surely try and work towards that. And if yes, which month do you think would suit the best? So 46% of you feel November would be the best time for it, while 35% of you say December. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for my team for sharing the results. Thank you to everyone who participated in the poll. It was great knowing your feelings and inputs about how open banking is going to be taking over the region. So that's it. Now, before we begin, I'd like to thank our banking association partners, Saudi Banks, Bahrain Association of Banks, and Oman Banks Association for their extensive support in the past few months. So thank you all very, very much. You can also watch the event live through the Saudi Banks social media site. Now, let's begin our first session for the day. As we discussed in the beginning, UK is among the first adapters of open banking globally. The open banking implementation entity has been established by the UK to enable successful adoption and rollout open banking among 9 of the largest banks in the UK. As the GCC now gears up for the open banking regulation, it's best to start out by hearing from the early adopters, especially the body designed to enable successful open banking implementation. So we are honored and equally delighted to welcome David Beardmore, the Ecosystem Development Director of the Open Banking Implementation Entity. David leads the growth and development of the open banking ecosystem, where his primary objective is to facilitate and encourage end user adoption of products and services powered by open banking. A very warm welcome to you, David, and now it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Roma, for the kind introduction. Good morning from London, England. It's nice and early in the morning here, and nowhere near as warm as it is there. Welcome to from the Open Banking Implementation Entity, the OBIE. I thank you for the kind invitation to join this conference and to share something of the invitation that we have taken in the UK in bringing about open banking and bringing this to life. So I hope that the experience that we have and that I can share with you from the UK can prove to be helpful to those of you that are now considering about how you implement open banking and benefit from those same points that we have in the GCC. Now, one important point that I always make at the beginning of presentations like this is that not everything we did was right. So please don't think that I'm here to tell you this is the blueprint for exactly how to do it and how to do it successfully. Some things we did, we would like to do differently if we had our time again. And I'll make reference to a few of those points as well, because I think some other countries have done some parts of it perhaps better than we have in the UK. Anyway, I started working in open banking in 2016, which was the launch of a very important report. So the CMA, which is the Competition and Markets Authority, which is the competition watchdog here in the UK, conducting an investigation into retail banking. I'll talk a little more about that in a second. My role here is that, as was said, I'm the Ecosystem Development Director at the OBIE. The OBIE is the body that was charged with overseeing the implementation of open banking in the UK. But in addition to the work in the UK, I've also been very fortunate to travel and to help governments and regulators around the world. So I've been very fortunate. I've worked in Canada, in Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and a few other countries too. Anyway, let's jump into the presentation. There are three main points that I want to talk about this morning. Number one is I want to look at the foundations for open banking. And I think for you that is particularly important. It's really essential that we understand really what open banking is and what it isn't, and set those foundations well. I'll reference it based on how we did it in the UK, because many of the elements that we implemented in the UK are being used in other countries around the world as they adopt open banking into their cultures and into their banking systems. Ours in the UK is very much led by regulation, as I'm pretty sure is the way that open banking will be introduced in the GCC. Secondly, I want to say just a few words about the UK situation. So just a snapshot of where we are. So we started in 2018 in January. So how far have we got? How many banks are participating? How many TPPs? How many fintechs and consumers and so on? And then finally, I just want to try and look into the future a little bit and speak about what I think is coming next. Again, mainly from a UK perspective, but I think there's a lot of those trends are actually global trends and would affect you too. So first of all, let's start with this the foundation principles about what's driving open banking. And I hope to create a little bit of controversy by starting off and saying open banking is not really about banking at all. And it's not also about technology. So those of you who believe this is all about APIs in banking, please indulge me, but I would beg to differ. To start with, open banking is about the value of customer data. And you'll see that this becomes a bit of a theme as I speak. This is about data as us as individuals. Now, the definition that I wrote in 2016-17 of open banking, and I haven't seen the need to change just yet, is this: that open banking is about customers of a bank who choose to give access to transactional data from that current account and give that data to an organization that is not their bank, in order that that third party, that organization, can provide new products and services. So let me say that again. It's customers of a bank choosing to give access to transactional data from that bank account and give it to an organization that is not their bank, so that that organization can give them new products and services. Now, apologies to the big banks who think and sometimes behave. This is very much a UK, but probably a global phenomenon, who think and behave that this is their data, that this data belongs to the banks. It's their property to do with as they want. I think the last decade has seen a rise in the awareness in customers' use of data. Unfortunately, most of this increased awareness has probably come from scandals and stories about the misuse of data. But whatever the cause, individuals now are much more aware that this is data about them, about their purchases, about their behaviors, about decisions that they have chosen to make. And therefore, decisions about how this data is then shared and used and analyzed and so on should be made by the individual, not by organizations who happen to be stewarding that data. Now, let me use Australia as my first example here, because this is one thing that I think they got right from the start and that we in the UK didn't. And if we could have our time again, I would like us to have more of this Australian approach. The Australians introduced a thing called CDR, Consumer Data Right, and their legislation is called the Consumer Data Right Act. Starting with banking data for sure, as we have done in the UK, but moving straight away from banking data to utilities, to telco, to healthcare. So Scott Farrell, who's the author of the report on behalf of the Australian government, the moment he'd finished his investigation into retail banking, moved straight away into utilities, even before open banking had actually started to be implemented. So CDR is all about the government there saying Australian citizens have got rights of access about this data about them and how they share and use that data. So my foundational element, my first point, if you like, is that open banking is about recognizing the value of data. Let's understand that first, the value that it can bring. Then we'll talk about all of the other elements. Okay, my second foundation for open banking then is what I call in the UK a trust framework. Now, this is the mechanism that allows us to be certain that the participants who are working within open banking, so banks, fintechs, that they really are who they say they are. So if you want people to share sensitive data about their current accounts, about their finances, you need to be absolutely certain that the platform is secure, so that when I choose to share my bank data with a third party, that third party really is who I think they are, that they're regulated and authorized and so on. So we do all of this in the UK through our open banking directory. And this requires all participants, so that's banks or ASPSPs as we call them, banks who provide data, fintechs or third-party providers, TPPs. All of these participants have to be authorized, they have to be thoroughly checked. The authorization takes place by the Financial Conduct Authority, which, as the name suggests, is the regulator here in the UK. And those permissions are specific to the role that they play. And I'll talk about different roles in a moment. But for each different role, there are different sets of checks, some more stringent than the others. And then finally, for the role that they play, each participant needs to present a valid digital certificate to ensure that the receiver understands that they really are who they say they are. So these are very stringent tests or checks that take place. And note also really important that we perform, the OBIE, we perform those checks on a daily basis. So we have a team whose job is simply providing daily permissions checks. So it's not just that once a body joins the open banking ecosystem that they're checked on entry. We check them every day to make sure that they are still valid, that certificate is still valid. The first day that they drop out, we will revoke their access, so really important. So the first element was it's all about customer data. The second foundation was this is about a trust framework. The third one, interesting from the poll that we ran just a moment ago, is that there's some kind of regulatory framework. Now in the UK, in Europe, we had the second Payment Service Directive, PSD2. In the UK, we took PSD2 and then wrote it into our open banking legislation. Australia, as I've mentioned, has the CDR framework. Mexico has a fintech law. In all these cases, there is legislation that surrounds open banking and defines the role and what will happen. Now, for me, one of the important things about the need for regulation is that regulation separates out from market forces. Now, I believe that market forces generally fix most things, but they don't fix everything. So in the UK, for example, if you receive payments from the state, if you're unemployed or ill and can't work, and you receive benefit from the state, that state funding has to be paid into a bank account, into a current account. So in the UK, we have a thing called a basic bank account, that all of the banks are required, or the regulated banks are required to provide. They cannot charge. I know in the GCC, many of you charge for your account. Here in the UK, you cannot charge for a basic bank account. So the problem here is that if it was left to the market, the banks simply would not provide any basic bank accounts because they would lose money on them. So regulation steps in and says that you must provide in this case, a basic bank account for benefits to be paid into. So there are a number of examples where the market doesn't fix it and regulation needs to step in. So that is one particularly important point. And as I say, many jurisdictions around the world, regulation steps in to help fix something that perhaps it wouldn't. Another good example is came from my work in Mexico. Working there with the banking regulator and the authorities there, it's obvious that any regulation around open banking that doesn't address the critical issue of financial inclusion really is not worth the paper it's written on. Now, nobody knows exactly what the proportion is, but it's something like half of the population of Mexico, which is about 125 million people. About half of them don't have any form of bank account at all. So any form of open banking legislation that talks about sharing data from a bank account is a bit pointless there, well, at least for half the population, because they don't have a current account. So it's important there in Mexico that the fintech law not only introduces some of the regulatory aspects of open banking that we've seen in the UK and that you'll be familiar with in GCC, but also some of the very specific issues around financial inclusion that are so prevalent in Mexico. So those are the sort of three foundations that I would suggest to you. I am going to just drop in a fourth one, just for good measure, because this is something I think is important, but it's not something that all countries have done, and I would highly recommend that you consider this for your own implementations. The fourth element that I might suggest to you is that you have a common technical standard. Now, for example, the Open Banking API in the UK is defined right down to the granular data level, to this data schema level. It's openly published, so you can go onto our website, which is openbanking.org.uk. And you go to the technical part of the technical section of the website, and you'll be able to download and see code at line level code, the schema. Now, this is really important because if you're a fintech in the UK and you know that you want to access data from any of the big banks, what you need to be able to do is build your product and know that where you're calling, for example, date of birth, that the date format that you're using for date of birth is consistent across all of the banks from which you're pulling data. Now, the truth is that all of the banks present data in a different way, but the Open Banking API defines the schema and says this is the format for this particular data field. So if you're the fintech, you know that so long as you code according to that API standard, that you'll be able to pull, in this case, date of birth. You'll be able to pull date of birth from all of the banks that are participating, because they're all working to a common recipe. They're all working to a common standard. I would strongly suggest that you do that if you're interested in encouraging innovation from your fintech community. If you want to make it really hard for fintechs, if you're not really interested in pursuing open banking, don't have a common standard, make it really difficult for them, and it won't succeed. I sincerely hope that's not the approach that you take. Anyway, as I said in my introduction, let me move to the second point now, which is a quick look at the status of the UK right now. So as I'm sure you're aware, open banking was launched in the UK in January 2018. So we are 2.5 years through this journey. It regulated or mandated that the 9 largest banks, and these banks between them covered about 84 or 85% of all of the current accounts in the UK. So these 9 largest banks were required by law, by mandate, to make customers' current account transaction data available to an authorized and regulated third party, a fintech, only though, note, where they had the permission, the consent of the consumer, of me, the individual. So that was the process. And as I say, they had to do that, share that data to a common API standard, one that was built according to the regulation, to the standard that's published on our website. So the 9 largest banks, we call them the CMA 9, the Competition Markets Authority 9. The CMA 9 from January 2018 were required by law that they had to share that data if it was requested by me, the consumer. However, this approach now has been widened and is now widely accepted across the UK. So instead of the 9 banks who started, we now have 86 banks in the UK. These are banks who are providing data. These are the banks that whom me as a consumer, I will say to my bank, please share my data with this fintech, with this third party. So 86 banks now are sharing data. These are live, not sandbox. These are banks that are live sharing data, 86 of those. And we have 230 third parties or fintechs who are live in market with a proposition, accessing data from those 86 banks in order to build and share and market their propositions. However, in addition to those 86 banks and 230 TPPs, there are another 450, something like that, entities in the sandbox. So they're working to test out new propositions, and many of those will come live. Not all of them, some will fail, and that's the purpose of the sandbox, to test out and make sure that if something isn't going to work, that we find out in a sandbox environment. But many of those 450 will come live. And every week now, I have a report that runs every Monday morning, so I'll receive it probably in an hour or so, and it will show out all of the new participants who joined last week, and how they've been allocated to representatives to look after them within my organisation. So that's the sort of status of play right now. As again, I'm sure you're aware, there are 2 types of fintechs who are playing in this space according to the roles that they have. One is account information sharing, and the other is payment initiation. Account information is the simplest one. And that's where many of the early products were. So this is me as a consumer saying to a fintech, I give you permission to access data from my current account, and that fintech then provides that data back to me to give me more information, perhaps about how I'm spending my money in a personal financial management app or something like that. PIS, or payment initiation, is different in that there I'm not just saying to the fintech, you have access to the data about my current account. What I'm actually saying is you've got access, read-write access, and so now you can make a payment from my account to somebody that I trust. Now, I mentioned the technical elements. For those of you who are more technically involved and are interested in volumes of data and so on, last month, so in May of last year, the CMA 9, those 9 regulated banks, because those are the only ones that we have to collect data from, there were more than 834 million API calls made to those 9 banks from TPPs requesting data from an individual. So more than 800 million API calls in a month. And again, that rises every single month, and it won't be long before we're at the billion API calls per month. But the most important metric for me are the number of individuals, the number of consumers and small businesses who choose to link their current accounts to an open banking provider. And right now, there are about 3.7 million. So we have a population of about 65, 70 million in the UK. There are about 50 million digitally active accounts. And of those 50 million digitally active accounts, we have just under 4 million who are participating in open banking. My objective is to get towards 6 million by the end of this year. Again, this figure grows by about 250,000 every month. So with a little bit of growth, perhaps in payments that I'll talk about in a moment, we shall get there. Now, one thing that often comes up in questions, so I thought I might try and preempt this now. And I just added this section in this morning. What are the use cases? How are people using open banking? What are the use cases that we have in the UK? So the OBIE, my organisation, has a mandate to represent 2 groups of people. Number one are individual consumers, individual citizens like me. But the other is that we also have a mandate to look after small businesses. So these are organisations with a turnover of up to £6.5 million sterling. Now, in both cases, they choose to grant access to their current account or accounts, often in the case of a small business, and give access to that third party fintech. The use cases, let's just think about individual citizens for a moment, like me. The very first use cases that we saw back in 2018 was personal financial management apps, PFM apps. So I have one on my phone here, and simply I link my current account, which is with Barclays, to my credit card, which is with American Express, and it pulls those two instruments together and shows me my spending on a monthly, my monthly spending, but shows it on a daily basis, how I'm doing it. And it breaks it down into spend. It says, this is how much you spent on travel, on food, on entertainment, on clothes, on whatever it might be. So those are the very first ones, and there are lots of these PFM apps. Some have then gone a little further and said, you know what, every time we see you make a transaction, we'll round it up. So if I bought a cup of coffee and it was £3.60, the rules that I may have set up within that PFM app might say any spend that's under £5, round it up to the nearest whole pound. So I made a transaction of £3.60. It will then say, well, let's take 40 pence, 0.4 of a pound, take it out and put it into a savings pot. And we call this sort of micro savings. And there are lots of these kinds of apps as well that help people save over a period of time. One of the other areas that's become really important in open banking is debt advice. In the UK, as in many Western countries, we have an issue with debt, consumer debt, and citizens spending more than they have. And so open banking has proved to be very, very valuable in helping those who are struggling with debt, first of all, to understand exactly how they're spending their money. So that's that PFM type app. But then gives the debt advisor real insight into how they're spending the money in order to help them save and get out of debt. So there are lots and lots of examples like that, particularly around the account information sharing. However, as I've mentioned, payment initiation is really coming to the fore in 2021. And so now we're seeing new ways to pay, and that is really taking off. And a lot of the growth that we're seeing in open banking now is coming specifically from open banking payments. The biggest catalyst for that is our government. The UK government now allows tax payments. So whether it's income tax or car tax for driving your car on the road, whatever it might be, allows open banking payments as the main primary method for paying from a citizen to pay tax to government. So those are some examples of consumer use cases. What about small businesses? Well, in many cases, they are very similar. Often the SMEs mirror what's happening in the consumer space. The biggest use case for open banking for SMEs is cloud accounting. So these are the organizations like Free Agent and Sage and Xero and QuickBooks and these organizations. And they allow an SME to choose to link its account or accounts usually to a cloud-based accounting platform. And that platform then helps manage those funds, looks out for cash flow forecasting and so on. And that's proved to be very, very useful. And we estimate that about 2/3 of all SME businesses in the UK are linked via open banking to a cloud accounting platform like that. Now, one of the good things that a cloud platform can do is that because they've got AI technology sitting in the background, they can predict when that business is going to be short of funds. So one of the big problems, as I'm sure you're well aware with small businesses, is cash flow. It's generally not good ideas that kill SMEs. It's cash flow that kills small businesses. So for example, here, because the accounts are linked via open banking, the cloud accounting platform can be looking forwards so to see how the account is performing and take steps to try to avoid any problems that the business might have there. So those are some examples. There are plenty more on our website that you can see, but you can take a look there. We have a thing called an app store. You can take a look and see what is happening there. So I just want to wrap up by just explaining where we're at in the UK, and this will take a couple of moments. You may be aware that we're at an inflection point in the UK. So this agreed roadmap of deliverables that's required by the CMA is coming to an end sometime over the next few months. But that doesn't yet mean that the job is done. So we now need to focus on end user adoption. So that 4 million consumers, we need to see that number grow. And also there are some issues that we need to fix, such as 90-day reauthorization for fintechs, which we can talk about later if necessary. But the most important thing for me is that we don't just stop with open banking, that we grow to this thing that has the label of open finance. So in the UK, we're focused just narrowly on current accounts. I'm passionate to see that we can grow this to open finance, very much in the way that Australia has done through their CDR approach. So whilst it's great that I've got that PFM app on my phone, what I really want is that complete picture of my finances across across all of the things, savings, investments and pensions and so on. It's not clear yet how that will come about in the UK. I believe it will do. There is some resistance from some organizations, but very soon, literally in the next few days, we will start to see a little bit more about the future of the OBIE, and hopefully from there some hints around open finance in the UK. Some of the things that are coming next in the UK, I've mentioned open banking payments. This is growing rapidly. There are a few hurdles still. We can make some payments via open banking payments, but not all. We can do a single immediate payment. What we can't do yet are variable recurring payments. So paying a utility bill, for example, where I have to pay it every month, but the amount varies, and those we are struggling with. Another thing that's coming are enhanced APIs. So I mentioned the regulatory open banking API, but there are lots of other enhanced APIs that will be useful. So things like proving an age, that somebody's age 18 or over, or proof of an address, or proof of residency at an address for a period of time. A third area that I believe we'll see is an extension beyond open banking into finance sectors like pensions, like investments. And fourthly, that will extend beyond finance into other sectors completely, very much along the Australian model. So energy, telco, healthcare, and so on. So in conclusion, what I think is that all of this is leading to a real shift in the banking landscape, in my opinion. Now, I believe that the idea that the major international banks, many of you are represented here on this conference here, the idea that you dominate everything that we do in personal finance, I do believe that that will weaken over time. I don't think that will be the picture in 10, 20 years' time. However, I don't subscribe to the view that this is the death of the big banks. I still believe that those big banks will be there, but I think the role that they play will change. And that will be largely driven by the rise of fintechs, who will provide products and services that, in my opinion, the banks should have provided. If those banks had provided many of these services, then you wouldn't need to have the fintech world that we do now. So I do think there is a seismic change. A rather silly phrase that we use in the UK, silly for the GCC, is that we say, don't bury your head in the sand. We don't have any sand in the UK, whereas you have lots of it there. But please don't bury your head in the sand. Please don't think that this is going to pass you by and then it'll stop and go away. This is here to stay. So so there we go. There is one area in this presentation that I haven't been able to touch on, but I believe it'll play a massive role in the transformation of personal finance, and that's the role of the big tech players. So these are the likes of Tencent and Alipay and Facebook and Google. They will undoubtedly play in this space. I don't think they want a banking license, but I do believe that they want to play in banking. So that's something perhaps for another Q&A, or you can email me or message me separately. But at that point, I think I'm well out of time. Apologies, I may have just gone over by a couple of moments. Thank you again for the opportunity to open this conference. It's a real privilege for me to be able to do that. Thank you for listening. I hope that it's been helpful to hear how we've started in the UK. And I wish you all good luck in your own endeavours as you look to bring the benefits of open banking in your own countries and your own jurisdictions. So thank you once again for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for that amazingly insightful talk. I just wish we had more time on hand where we could listen to you, but unfortunately we've run out of time for this session. But to all our attendees, please do join us on Wednesday, as David is going to be joining us again, and you can ask him all your questions. David, in fact, there are 2 questions in the Q&A section, so if you can respond to them by typing in your responses, that would be great. So thank you so very much once again, David. It was a pleasure having you, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Thank you so much. Great. Now, moving on to our next session, which is very, very interesting here. So Bahrain has been the first country in the GCC to launch the open banking revolution, and now moving on to that implementation phase. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is all set to launch this regulation by early 2022, and UAE and Kuwait are expected to be closely on their heels for the same. So in this session, we now address the regulatory framework for the GCC region to see what's required for successful open banking rollout, the need for standardization across the region, and how do we ensure customer data privacy, among other important topics. So I'm delighted to invite our moderator, Noha Shakir, founder and CEO of Egyptian FinTech Association and Vice President of Africa FinTech Network. Noha heads both the Egyptian FinTech Association and Africa FinTech Network. Both are nonprofit organizations that serve financial inclusion and equitable economic growth across Africa using fintech and entrepreneurship as a means to democratize finance. Welcome, Noha. Noha will not be able to switch on her video due to technical issues, and so that her audio clarity is better, but we can all hear Noha loud and clear, so welcome, Noha. Noha is joined by some of the most senior members of the industry, so I'm honored to welcome Dr. Adnan Ahmed Yusuf, Chairman for Bahrain Association of Banks. With around 4 decades of international banking experience, Mr. Adnan is a global figure in the Islamic banking and finance services industry. Previously, as President and Chief Executive, Mr. Yusuf has led Baraka Banking Group since inception, developing the group into one of the largest and the most diversified Islamic banking groups in the world, operating with a network of around 700 branches in 17 countries. Welcome, Mr. Adnan. Up next, we have Mr. Ali Hassan Musa, the CEO for Oman Banks Association. Ali Musa has 24 years of experience in various fields of banking, such as technology, retail, marketing, operations, credit and recoveries, as well as in other industry sectors. And last but not the least, we have Dalal Buheji, Executive Director, Investment Origination for Bahrain Economic Development Board. Dalal heads the responsibility of sourcing and attracting high-value investments into the Kingdom of Bahrain from Europe and the Americas. It is with much pleasure we welcome our panel members to this important discussion. And now it's over to you, Noha. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you very much, Rahma, for the wonderful introduction. I'm really delighted and glad to be here today, moderating not just one panel, but two, during which we are going to look into the regulatory side of the challenges and the opportunities that the open banking brings in. We are going to look into details on the Bahraini experience, and we are going to look into opportunities of how we can benchmark and learn. During the next very few years, regulators and supervisors within the GCC and the rest of the Arab world, of course, are going to need to address several challenges that are associated not just with open banking, but with fintech, that technological innovation in the financial services in general. I'm really glad to have my panelists in here today, and I wish to start with by Mr. Ahmed, who can actually walk us through a wonderful holistic presentation that he has prepared, introducing us to open banking in principle, looking into its future, and of course, looking into Bahrain's open banking. And we've actually shared a really interesting discussion yesterday on how that can also help the entire Arab world. Mr. Adnan, if you may please start.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to introduce this subject, which is open banking. You know that in 2016, we go back to 2016, we have been asked by the CBB, the central bank, to review this subject. And I was very happy with it because a few years back, I make a kind of recommendation to the governor to exchange this information through the GCC. And at that time, our governor, he said that Adnan, maybe the other central bank will not allow this information to go around the countries because they consider that these accounts are confidential and all the things which we as a bankers and everybody know about it. But what we did is we reviewed the proposal in 2016, 2017. In 2018, CBB, the Central Bank of Bahrain, put a kind of a draft regulation which is issued by them, and Bahrain society started, reviewing it. And we have within the society we create committees, and within the committees we know that this subject will go to one of this committee which reviewed all standards issued by the central banks, whether on the IT, whether on compliance, whether on any of the subject which the banking deal. We review it, and finally we agreed on it, and we provide the central banks in December 2018 of our approval. By June 2019, this regulation has been issued by the central bank and it has been already implemented. And still my wish is to have all the information, not just for the retail, not for the SMEs, but also for the corporate, because now we are starting having corporate within the Arab countries and especially within the Gulf countries. They are borrowing. Omani company, they borrow from Bahrain. A Bahraini company borrowed from Saudi. Saudis, they borrow from the Bahrain market. But I think that by allowing the information to be circulated from banks to banks, this will give a good pictures to all institutions within the Gulf countries, and then we can expand it to the Arab countries, especially countries which are very close to us, which is Egypt, Jordan. Because I remember the first visa payments we started was with Egypt from the GCC. Bahrain first with Egypt, and then GCC with Egypt. And I remember at that time, that is maybe it was in the 90s, it was at that time who was in charge, the chairman, it was Rahmatullah Ali Mahmoud Abdel Aziz, who was also the chairman of Al Ahli Bank. So therefore, let us, implement something here in the Gulf countries, and if we find that there is a weakness, we can strengthen and we put it in the right directions, and then we can expand it to the Arab countries, because I believe that open banking is the future for lending within the Arab countries, and it is a good opportunities for SMEs, retail, as well as corporate to have their information, although that it is confidential, but banks are very careful in dealing with this information. Therefore, I believe that we encourage all the banks within the GCC to make sure that by 2022, open banking should be implemented. This is my recommendation to the banks. I was very pleased with the presentation which was done by David. Really, he went through all the background on the UK, and I think that we will have the similar things here within the Gulf. Now, this is what I want to say about Bahrain and how we took the initiatives. There is a small presentation. I have already sent it to Sarah, and I think that Sarah, she can send it to all the participants to get the benefit out of it. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk on this subject.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adnan, and thank you for the presence and actually opening the door to discussing some further details on what actually has made Bahrain embark on the open banking space, and also some reference to how standardization of supporting frameworks for open banking can actually open the door to that creativity that we are looking forward to within the financial industry to better serve customers. I wish to invite Dalal to elaborate more on the Bahraini experience and on the standardization of open banking. Dalal, if you may.
Sure. Thanks, Neha, and thank you once again for inviting me to this panel. Open banking is a great subject, and we're very proud in Bahrain that we've embarked on this journey. It all started through our experience with the regulatory sandbox. Having an open banking third-party provider entering the sandbox testing open banking, which also made us aware of the importance of regulating this sector. We realized that the future of banking and, as David mentioned, wider, financial services and ultimately the telecom industry and other sectors will be sharing information and open data. So the Central Bank of Bahrain really took this seriously. We, with the Central Bank of Bahrain at the Bahrain Economic Development Board, reviewed the open banking framework and regulations. We were in very close discussions as well with our partners at the UK, learning from them and from the EU on what was the best way to regulate open banking. So in 2018, end of the year, we issued the first open banking regulation. We mandated all banks to be open banking compliant, and we licensed our first third-party provider in the open banking space, both the AISP and PISP. Soon after, the whole idea of this, it's an innovative new sector. So the Central Bank of Bahrain was very keen to also engage with the local stakeholders, such as the banks and third-party providers, to understand what are the right framework in place. So we realize standardization is very important. It makes it easy for third-party providers to tap into the APIs, plug and play, and offer solutions in a seamless way to consumers without tweaking, their backbone and technology to make it appropriate with the technology that the banks are using. So in 2020, the Central Bank of Bahrain issued another version of open banking, including the framework and standardization on what would be the requirements for banks to be open banking compliant. Similarly, what third-party providers need to open and enter the open APIs of those banks. Now we are, 2 years and a half in this journey. We started with testing, and now we have a full-fledged regulation. And we do really look forward to as Dr. Adnan mentioned, to take this to the next level, where we want to share this with the GCC and the wider MENA ecosystem, and hopefully also welcome more innovation in the market. So I agree with what David said in his opening remarks. Open banking is here to stay, and it's something that we really think that will progress and will be very more innovative as well, and will bring in new solutions for consumers and allow information to be shared, but also seamless payments within different financial institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalal. One question in here. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you have faced? I mean, we have seen from other markets, when they started to actually embark on open banking, they faced a lot of challenges. Some are with the banks, some are within the availability of the know-how or resources. Like, everything is changing. You are disintegrating the value chains of the consumer services in particular, and the data and how it's being managed, and like having to balance consumer protection with and data privacy with the fact that now customers own their data and they have that ability to give permission to whomever they wish, whether it's a bank or even a non-financial service provider who's providing some supporting service or the like. What were those challenges that you faced, and how did you manage to overcome them?
Well, of course, with technology and innovation, there's always challenges because of the lack of know-how on how things could result in the future. So we were lucky in a way that we know that other countries have already started open banking. So we made sure that we understand how the UK and the EU have embarked in the open banking space. We learned from them, and we took in the best know-how and the best practices. But the also very important thing, Naha, is that the Central Bank of Bahrain is very keen on engaging with the local industry. So we had roundtables with the banks, roundtables with third-party providers to understand what are the risks, what are the challenges, and obviously, as you rightly said, data protection is very important, which we have the right laws for it. What would be the right standards and technology that banks will need to upgrade their systems to be able to be open banking compliant? So it is a journey, and we know that, but that shouldn't stop us from innovating. We know that banking as what it was 10, 20 years ago is no longer going to be the same moving forward, and banks are aware of that. So what we need to do is put in a roadmap and a standardization in place to allow banks and third-party providers to work with these challenges and to be able to bring in the new technologies in place in a very precise timeline. We were very ambitious with our timeline. We actually mandated all banks to be open banking compliant. But that's the beauty of Bahrain. We are a small market that are able to act fast and be nimble. And to date, all banks in Bahrain are open banking compliant. And you know what, Noha, the thing is that we know that this open banking framework will be always open for changes, and we're open for that. And we are in constant dialogue, whether it's at the Bahrain Economic Development Board or the Central Bank of Bahrain, to listen to the local stakeholder. And we do have a committee in place, which is headed by Central Bank of Bahrain and involves Bahrain Association of Banks, but also banks and third-party providers, to listen to what are the challenges and how we can overcome these challenges. But I also have to say, for all markets and countries that are really new to this and are embarking into open banking, learn from other players. There's no shame in that. We did that through our partners at the UK to understand what they've done, and they were very helpful in making us understand the importance of open banking and how to standardize it to be able to welcome innovation. So challenge is there, but you just need to work with it and have open communication with the market.
Thank you very, very much for the elaborate answer. And definitely last but not least, we have Ali now from Oman. And Ali's going to tell us a bit more about open banking, its benefits, definitely to the financial industry, the market, and the consumer. And again, there are multiple models to engaging in open banking. We have seen the ones that are government-led that David elaborated on in the morning, and then followed by the led. But there are other models that Ali is going to talk to us about. And of course, we wish to know about the developments that are happening in Oman. Like here in Egypt, we have just launched our fintech law that supports and enables open banking. So what is happening in Oman, and how do you plan to overcome that massive skill gap that is there within the Arab world and GCC to actually enable the financial industry practitioners and of course supervisors and the like to get the best use and utilize the open banking to create opportunities for economic growth for everybody. Thank you, Ali, for being here, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Naha. It's a pleasure being here today with all of you. Thanks to David for an enlightening presentation, to Dr. Adnan for sharing the Bahrain experience, and to Dalal as well with her valuable advice. As we all know, the principle, the fundamental of open banking is the consumer data. So the consumer basically owns the data. Now, how will that reflect in the regulations or in the culture remains to be seen in this part of the world, because though we have embarked on the journey of open banking, but we need to learn from the others like Australia, as David said. We've got to try it from the start by having regulations and legislation defining that the consumer owns the data. Now that is really important. So that's the fundamental and the principle of open banking that we are working on. And I'm hopeful that regulation will come into effect in this region as a whole. The benefits of open banking are widespread. We all know that the open banking in terms of barriers reduces the barriers of entry to financial services, reduces the barrier for innovation in the banking sector. Now, all this is within the concept of financial inclusion. So the financial inclusion principles as such are accessibility to financial services, the awareness of different products and services, what's best for the consumer, and last but not least is fairness. So if we work on the principles of financial inclusion, open banking is actually an enabler of financial inclusion. And we need to look at it from this concept. It is really, really important for societies, for countries such as Oman, where there's, it's fairly or relatively a large country with different topography and widespread population in different regions. So the accessibility and the awareness of accessibility to financial services and awareness of the products and services that are best and that are fair to the consumer is really the most important thing in financial services, especially in countries, as I mentioned, like Oman. Now, what's happening around the globe is very interesting. When Google opens or offers current accounts, it is actually open banking application. It is powered by BBVA, Bank Bilbao Vizcaya Argentina, the multinational bank. So that's a massive customer intake onboarding for BBVA through Google. And the enabler was actually open banking API. So that's one massive example. There are numerous examples. In the UK, as David mentioned, the journey started and the project started with the big banks, but actually the smaller banks have taken more advantage of it. Starling Bank in the UK, a fairly small bank, founded by a Welsh lady back in 2014. All they do is APIs. They actually provide APIs to customers to integrate third-party products. The customers write their reviews without any restrictions right on the website. And this fairly small bank that embraced open banking was voted by the prestigious British Bank Awards as the best bank of 3 years in a row, 2018, 19, and 20. So you can see the power of the open banking, especially for the consumer, especially for the smaller and medium-sized banks. Now, in the region, we all know now, Bahrain is a leader, a pioneer in open banking. They have launched open banking and rule book. It's there, I think, on their website. In Oman, we're looking at that. We're learning from that. As Dalal said, there's no it's good that for someone who's a latecomer to actually learn from others. We're looking at in Oman, looking at UK, looking at specifically Bahrain to learn from that experience, as well as Saudi. And looking at different ways of implementing the open banking regulations and standards. And Bahrain, as we all know, started with mainly two services: the account information and payments. And rightly so, that makes sense, because these are the most important services that customers normally ask for. So when we look at the open banking regulatory models, we see them such as UK, such as the Bahrain model, is that they're driven more from what banks can offer, what is best for the consumer, what is more in demand. However, there are places like China where the market forces have actually driven open banking regulations. So what the fintech has done, what the consumer wanted, the market forces have then evolved the regulations behind them. A bit like fintech regulations in Egypt. Perhaps Nuha knows more about this. Fintech regulations in Egypt were actually driven by the market, and then the regulations came, unlike other countries where the regulation started and then expanded. So there are two different models. There's no right or wrong. What makes sense, I think, as arguable, is to go with the commercial model. What banks can offer at this stage, what is more in demand. So what we have done in Oman, we started this journey with establishing or setting up a fintech committee within the Central Bank of Oman, which is the regulator for the banking industry. That fintech committee works very closely with the technology committee of the Oman Banks Association. So under the Oman Banks Association, like the Bahrain Bankers Association or Association of Bankers, we have different committees, and we work very closely on fintech regulations, setting up a fintech hub, an accelerator and an incubator for fintech, as well as now working on open banking regulations. So the first thing was as a survey. Now the survey went to the banking sector saying, what is the most important products and services? What are the challenges you think we will face? Awareness is an issue in this part of the region. When I sent the e-brochure for this event to my friends on the WhatsApp group, one of my friends came back and actually said, yes, excellent, Ali. We need open banking. We need banks to be open in the evenings and weekends. That is not open banking. So there is an awareness issue that we need to deliver to the society about the power of open banking and what they can achieve and can be delivered for their benefit. So all this is done through a survey that we have completed. That was our first step in Oman. We are still very early stages. We're working now on the model of the platform rather than the standards themselves. So we're not there yet. The model we would like to set up something similar to the UK, where an entity works closely with the central bank as well as the banking sector, but that is work in progress. And then we will come to the standards, and we hope to have a clear single standard for API. So that's where we are. As I mentioned, very early stages in Oman, but it's coming up very fast. And we have, as I mentioned, the advantage of learning from others within the region, like Bahrain, international, like the UK or even Singapore. And you know, the message is that Oman will be your next big thing in terms of open banking and fintech innovation, especially, as I mentioned, because there is really a huge need for the society and the population for accessibility to financial services, awareness, and what's best for them when using such services. So that's what I would like to share with you today. The skill set that is needed for open banking, for fintech, for all this innovation in terms of banking technology is really is scarce currently around the globe. So we really need in the banking sector, whether it's in Oman or in the region or elsewhere, we need IT specialists that are that are specialists in artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithm mechanics, behavior analysts. It's all to do with customer behavior, transactional behavior. So we need those analysts. We need designers, process engineers, universal advisors, partnership enablers, cybersecurity experts, digital forensics, when things go wrong. So all these new areas that I think we need to really invest in as a banking sector, as well as government and the society, in coming up and enabling our youth to actually gain such knowledge so that they can be part of the innovation and the changes that are happening. One example is I always give of an innovative bank is Kakao Bank in South Korea. Actually, 40% of that bank staff are IT, but they're not the usual IT, the IT that I just mentioned with the new skill set. So with that brief note, I thank you once again and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very, very much, Ali. Actually, we do have a couple of questions in here. One of them is about the use cases that you would want to see commercialized first. We're definitely all looking towards having a more inclusive financial industry, not just in Oman, but around the Arab world and the globe, actually. So what are the prioritized commercial cases that you would want to have first? That's the question. We have like 3 minutes left, and we still have one more question for Dalal to answer. So if you can keep it to the point and brief, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Noha. So it is something very similar to what Bahrain implemented in terms of account services and payments. A shop owner in a remote area or a village in Oman, it is essential for that person who runs that shop, that small business, to have access to different products and services, to check and to see what is best for that business, small business, for himself, herself, in running that outlet, and making the appropriate payments, transactions with minimal charges. So it is that, account services and payments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. That's wonderful. One last question that we have in here is for Dalal. Dalal, the efforts that you've undergone in Bahrain is actually huge, whether it's the central bank or the Economic Development Board. Now, measuring success, very important to make sure that those efforts are sustainable and that they bring in the planned value out of them to the market, consumers, and of course the financial industry as a whole. Have you put together a matrix in place to measure success? And perhaps you can tell us a one or more objective that is included within that matrix to measure success.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So there's different kind of measures that we take, whether it's on the Bahrain economic development perspective, or the Central Bank of Bahrain, or the wider Kingdom of Bahrain. Obviously, you know, we have embarked as a country towards a digital economy, and open banking is a really important play, and that will also allow us to enter the digital economy. To us in Bahrain, it's very important that we get the regulations right. We have banks that are open banking compliant. But from a more perspective, from an economic development board perspective, we want to see more third-party providers that actually bring in innovation and innovative solutions in the market. So we want to attract more players globally and regionally to come and participate in this open banking framework, to provide their solutions. And as Ali Musa said, bring in as well new skill sets. You know, the new skills of banking is no longer going to be the typical skills that we are used to. So we want to see technologists. We want to see more technical skills that are appropriate for technology and open banking to come in and establish a presence in Bahrain. So yeah, I mean, obviously, obviously we do have a matrix of success, whether it's on a country level, but also from a regulatory perspective and an FDI perspective.
Thank you very much, Dalal. That's absolutely wonderful. Well, we've just launched a FinTech diploma in here, the Egyptian FinTech Association partnership with the Nile University. And that's one thing that we would love to see all around the, definitely the Arab world. Thank you very much, Ali, Adnan, and Dalal for being here. Thank you for the insights and the valuable additions. I hope our audience have enjoyed our panel as much as I have being here amongst you. And thank you very much. We go to
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Noha. And before I thank the panelists and actually let them go, Dr. Adnan, we do have a question for you, if you can quickly address it for us in a short point. So the question is, one of the major concerns when it comes to open banking is the risk that concerns the customer data protection. So according to you as the chairman of the Bahrain Association of Banks, and from your experience, what are the regulations and legislations that should be in place to ensure that the customer's data is protected and safe?
Well, as you know that when the central banks, whether in Bahrain or other countries, issued regulation, they have to make sure that also the legal process for all these standards and for all this regulation should be under the law. So therefore, we are always coordinating what the central bank issued with the Ministry of Justice. And we have a very good coordination between us and them. And this is, as Ali mentioned it is a kind of learning process, because I'm sure that UK and other countries also, they were facing a lot of problems with the legal and with the regulations. But as far as Bahrain, I think that we cover it all now. But still, this is something which is open, and this is something which we have to make sure that we put a very good kind of procedures whereby we control both the banking side, the information side, which is the IT side, and the legal side. I have to admit that, we done it maybe now about 95%. But my wish is not to restrict it just only for some information. I like, to have this open banking, open for everything, open for a retail, open for the corporate side, for the SMEs. This is my wish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Adnan, for those valuable insights. Thank you to all our panelists for a brilliant panel discussion. So thank you, Dr. Adnan, Mr. Ali, and Dalal for your valuable inputs. And thank you so much to Noha for beautifully steering the panel discussion. Thank you for being with us. The questions are still there in the Q&A section down below. So if you want to take them and type in your answers and respond to them, please feel free to do that. So thank you very much to our panelists for joining us. And now moving on, it is time for our next session of the day, which is the CEO's panel. So we now move on to the CEO panel discussion, where we have the CEO from a global bank, a regional bank, and a neobank to discuss on what open banking means for the region's banking industry and how they plan to leverage it, what's required for the development for an open banking ecosystem, the benefits versus the threat, and lots more. So I'm honored to welcome our panelists. We have with us Dr. Boutros Klink, CEO for Standard Chartered Middle East. Dr. Boutros is the CEO of the Middle East cluster and is responsible for SCB's operations in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and Lebanon. Dr. Klink is also the CEO of Standard Chartered Capital Saudi Arabia and is based in Riyadh. Welcome, Dr. Klink. We also have Dr. Bernard van Linde, CEO of Commercial Bank of Dubai. Dr. Bernard van Linde is an international banker with more than 25 years of hands-on experience. He built his career at ABN AMRO Bank, Netherlands, before moving to GCC, where he was a general manager of treasury at Saudi Hollandi Bank in Saudi Arabia, before becoming the CEO of the same bank in 2009. Welcome, Dr. Linda. We also have with us Olivia Crespin, the CEO of the newly launched digital bank Zand. As the co-founder and CEO of Zand, Olivia focuses on leveraging hybrid digital banking strategies to establish Zand as the first fully digital bank in the region to combine both retail and corporate banking. And now I'm equally delighted to welcome our host for the session, the dynamic correspondent from CNBC, Dan Murphy. So welcome, Dan, and all our panelists, and it's over to you now, Dan.
Roma, thanks very much for the kind introduction. And hi, everyone, Dan Murphy here from CNBC. Can I just start by saying the conversation has been so engaging so far, and I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here today and listen to you all and also take part in our next conversation. A couple of points before we get started. I think as someone who looks at this from an outsider's perspective, it's very clear now that open banking is going to change how banks view their business models. It's going to change their service offering, and it's ultimately going to change who they see as their competitors as well. And I think one thing that we haven't mentioned throughout the course of the conversation this morning is the fact that what we're seeing now is with the pandemic, it's definitely accelerated a lot of these trends. It's ultimately helped to pull all of us together today and to put this open banking topic at the top of the agenda. So I'm thinking that's really interesting right now, and how this COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated this drive towards the digitalization for banks and regulators alike. So what we're going to do now is have a conversation which ultimately brings together two incumbent banks and a challenger bank to discuss some of the implications, the opportunities, and the trends. So Bernard, Boutros, and Olivier, welcome into the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, so let's get started. Walk me through some of the factors that are driving the development of open banking and the API economy here in the Middle East. And I guess for the incumbent banks, do you think this is more of an opportunity or a threat to your current business model? Bernard, did you want to kick us off?
Sure, will be a pleasure. Thank you very much, Dan. When I look at Commercial Bank of Dubai today, I would say that we're partially ready for the open banking area. We worked very hard over the last couple of years to get our infrastructure API-ified. So we built the APIs around our infrastructure, around our systems. We invested massively in middleware and in workflow, which I believe are two of the key components of getting your infrastructure ready, but we're clearly not there yet in full. So our APIs today are probably still too tightly coupled to our systems, and work best when you focus on a handful of fintech partners. And that's exactly what we've been doing over the last couple of years. So our focus has been to work with fintechs to get their solutions, to integrate their solutions into our infrastructure, and to really add value in that way. And everything we've done has been done using our APIs. So we worked with Now Money, a local fintech in Dubai, to provide banking services to lower income workers. We worked with Tunes from Singapore to provide the last mile on remittances. And we worked with a Belgian fintech to provide the first robo-advisory in the Middle East. From my perspective, those three fintechs that we worked with most closely have clearly provided massive added value to us. It has been a great benefit to us. So when you ask threat or opportunity, when I restrict what we've done so far, it's clearly been an opportunity to us. But we haven't done open banking yet in full. I think when you would move to open banking, when you would really make your data available, when you would define your APIs and make them available in full, it will be a different story. Probably given the bank that we are and the size that we have, the fact that we've invested so much in partners already, and the fact that we are quite agile in the way we work, I would still come out on the side of opportunity rather than threat. But it's clearly a different landscape than the one that we've seen so far.
Okay, fascinating. Boutros, would you agree with that? How do you see open banking ultimately impacting StanChart and your clients and customers?
Oh, thanks, Dan. And it's a delight to be part of this panel on this forum. So thank you very much. Obviously, banking is being transformed. And I think open banking is a mechanism of getting to where we would like to go. Now, banking, the way we looked at it in the past, is changing, and we should think of banking more of an extension to our digital lives. So it's about, at the end of the day, how do you deliver the best and most efficient banking service? It is about the client. It's a client-centric approach. It is transformational. It is the future. So banks will need to adapt. Now, at the end of the day, it is, the choice of the client. It has always been. So the clients have always decided how to go, and banking has adapted over the years. Now the challenges are different. But again, it is important that we take note of what is happening. It is important that we prepare ourselves and engage and embark on this wonderful journey. I think it is also, extremely exciting for banks as well, because it does create a lot of opportunities. So obviously, speeds up innovation, new ideas, introduces more competition, resulting in new products, better and faster service, more efficiencies, better accessibility to banking services, more inclusion. It reduces the costs, the fees. So we'll need to work a little bit harder in that direction. But again, it builds a strong ecosystem and makes collaboration easier across institutions and stakeholders. So the banking sector will emerge, in my opinion, leaner, stronger. A new generation of people is dictating a new way of banking. For banks, it provides access to new pools of customers. It allows us to efficiently co-create solutions and products with our partners. It provides access to more data mining, stronger data analytics, more customization and targeted solutions. It allows for better risk management, more accurate risk assessments and ratings. It frees up capital. So again, this is the way of the future. The trend is here to stay. We must embrace it and adapt quickly while ensuring that the safety of the data and assets of our clients are not compromised.
Thanks, Boutros. And you raised a great point about safety, which I wanted to dig into in just a moment. But first, let's bring Olivia into the conversation, because I think what's happening with Zand is really, really fascinating, Olivia. So tell us about it. Explain your development journey so far, and in reflection after hearing what you've just heard, what can you offer your customers that the two banks that you share the screen with today can't?
Hello, hi Dan. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here. Right. So, what I want to say, right, is I'm very excited as well by what Boutros and Ben said. I think on the spirit, I think we are all aligned. I would say. I think there is huge opportunity. I think the challenge at the end of the day is to be able to combine two DNA. The DNA of banking, which is about risk management, financial expertise, compliance with regulation, and the DNA of digital, which is more around customer centricity, better leverage of analytics, and latest kind of technology. And when we bring all this, we are able to bring better solution to clients. So what we have been doing, and I always mention, we are not creating a bank, but we are creating a platform with a banking license. So that means that from day one, because we don't have a legacy, we're able to connect very nicely with fintech, startups that are complementing very nicely our offering. So we have onboarded, right, as part of our journey, quite a few fintechs, some doing PFM, like Monitor, others doing on the security area, like a company called Vicky, and we have more and more coming in. So we are really embracing that. We really believe that the complementarity of all this kind of organization, we are focusing on very specific topics, will be able to bring the best to clients. obviously. So where we are, you asked me, Dan, where we are on our journey. Right now, we complete all the formalities, right, to get approval. We build our entire organization, technology is ready, operation ready, risk ready, compliance ready. We are in a closed user group right now, meaning that we are onboarding, I would say, kind of friends and family on both the retail and corporate side, and we should be ready to go to market in the next couple of months. So that's where we are right now in our journey.
Okay, fascinating. So next couple of months, just to follow up on that, where are you at with the regulatory approvals and specifically the UAE banking license? Are they far off or are they approved now?
So right now we are just on the internal kind of topic to finish the integration and incorporation of the new company, Zend. And as soon as this is completed, we'll be able to go live.
Okay, and you expect that to happen somewhere in the second half of the year, but no definitive timeline just yet?
That's correct, Dan.
Okay. How soon before you're fully operational then? By the end of the year?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And just on this topic, because I'm really curious about it, how and where do you intend on scaling, and what does the growth trajectory look like for Zend?
So we are really kind of going to focus on two businesses, and it's one of the first time you have a digital bank starting with both retail and corporate side, right? So we are obviously on the retail space. We have all the kind of products that you may have, right? Comparable to N26 or Revolut. We have cards, we will have loans, we will have accounts, we'll have PFM, we'll have all these kind of things. But we are also focusing on the corporate side, where we are going to work primarily on supply chain finance. And in fact, the way we're doing supply chain finance is leveraging ecosystem. In fact, we call it ecosystem link financing. That means that we are going to finance SME when they understand the ecosystems they are in and when they understand their behavior. So a very strong focus on this area. What we believe is that we are at the intersection of many different things. The platform has a banking license, as I mentioned, a very strong leverage of data. We have built a superb data platform, latest kind of data platform. And we are leveraging the ecosystem. So a lot of the product we are going to offer, first of all, they need to be fully digital. So some products that cannot be digitalized, such as mortgage right now, we're not going to look into it. But eventually in the future, when you have tokenized mortgage, we'll be able to do so. And where we add value compared to other banks is really this aspect of being embedded and understanding the ecosystem. And that's really the area we are going to focus both on retail and on the corporate side.
Okay, and before we move on, can I just get some reaction from Bernadette Boutros on this? How do you think this is going to impact your operations, and what do you think this new entry, this new challenger bank means for the financial services ecosystem in the UAE and across the Middle East?
Yeah, I think it's a great development. And I think your question to Olivier, your first question, if I would have to answer it, it should be easier for Olivier to do things faster than we do them. But that's exactly the challenge to us. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think when I look at what we've done over the last couple of years, the fact that we're able to open accounts real time, just using an Emirates ID, we can give cards in real time, we do personal loans. In a way, all banks, including us, and I'm sure Dr. Boutros is going to say the same things, have become digital to a very large extent already. So I think Olivier's biggest advantage is the fact that he can start from scratch. Our biggest advantage is that we start with a couple of 100,000 customers already. And I think the challenge that he puts and that Zend puts to the banking sector, and one that I really embrace and look forward to, is to make sure that we become as agile and as fast and as innovative as he will be.
Boutros, your thoughts just quickly?
Yeah, no, completely agree with Dr. Byrne. And, we look at this at Standard Chartered as well. We somehow saw it coming. So we're looking at it in various ways. So we have the the bank and how we're going to transform it. But beyond that, we launched a purely virtual bank in Hong Kong late last year. And it really is to start from scratch and figure out how that journey will be. So it is more in line with what Olivier is doing, not relying on any kind of infrastructure or maybe handicap, if I may put it, of the existing bank. And then eventually the goal would be to try to figure out what works and what we can incorporate in the more traditional bank. But in addition to that, we also invest quite a bit. We have established Standard Chartered Ventures a few years back to invest in fintechs, partner up with some up-and-coming technology firms, etc., to really understand the technologies that are evolving, see how we can adapt that within our organization. And we also provide a platform for those companies to come and, once they prove the concept, we can incorporate it and test it in a much broader setting. So a lot of things are happening. It is transformational for the banking industry. And it's very important, it will require resources. It will require technology investment. It will require a change in mindset. It will require upskilling, reskilling of people. So there is a lot of work that needs to happen. And going back to Dr. Burns' point, it's a lot easier to start from scratch, to undo, some of the legacy issues or the main infrastructure that supports the existing bank, and try to figure out how to move that into the future.
And I also wanted to get a sense of the type of investment that's going to be required in order to make open banking truly come to life, because one of the other great points that was raised earlier is the fact that this is going to be quite security heavy as well. There are, of course, inherent risks when it comes to sharing data. This is something that end users and consumers are particularly concerned about in this day and age. It also raises issues around regulation, for example, and data privacy. So what measures are being put in place to protect the end user? And can you maybe address this first, Bernard?
Yeah, of course, data protection, information security, protection of customer data is something that banks have been doing for a very long time. It's also something that regulators and legislators in the region have focused on heavily. I think some of the strongest customer data protection laws and regulations are those applying to banks in the region, with things like customer data not being allowed to even leave the country in many of the GCC countries. So it's something that we're used to. It will, you're right, Dan, it will require additional investments, but it's, from my perspective, it's more a gradual type of additional investments than that it's a radical change. We are used to protecting customer data for a number of years. We're used to providing high security environments already, and we will continue to do so. I think a bigger challenge on the technology side will probably be on getting the APIs up to the absolutely required level. As I said, we made good progress already, but we clearly have some way to go there still. And I guess the same will be true for many of the incumbent banks in the region.
Boutros, would you like to address this as well? And the other extension of the question that I had was, do you think banks or the consumer should be at the center of what's being permissioned to a third-party provider when it comes to the APIs? That's a good point that Bernard mentions.
I think it's, if we want to succeed at this, it has to, the entire ecosystem has to evolve, starting with the regulation, the legal system. Something goes wrong, what happens? Fairness. We also need to, in my opinion, protect the banking sector as well, because it offers a lot of benefits to the economies, to the to improving living conditions at the end of the day. So at the end of the road, the goal is really the client and what is in the best interest of the client, different permutations. Now, the investment will have to happen. We spend a lot of resources in terms of securing data. You know, the cybersecurity threats are a big major topic on everyone's agenda. It is probably one of the top risks at any bank, ours included. But that doesn't prevent us from investing in, you know, developing our infrastructure and our operating model to cater for the future. I think this investment is actually required. We need to carve it out. We need to evolve legacy areas, create efficiencies to ensure we are able to, produce the resources required for this investment. And it touches many, many points. You know, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it touches, your entire staff. It touches awareness of everyone and the skilling. And, it will require probably, I think, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, a new set of skills. Some jobs will come off, and we need to reinvent ourselves. We'll probably be able to do whatever we're doing now a lot more efficiently. So a lot of thought is going into this. I think the end product will be, something that is actually phenomenal. But will it have its challenges? Absolutely. And we need to, just as the normal banking model continues to provide us with the challenges day in, day out, the new one will face its challenges. Now, the question is, I think, the faster everybody gets on board and the faster we overcome some of the challenges in terms of a level playing field, in terms of regulation, being the same regulation applying to everyone in the sector, ensuring that the ultimate goals are well aligned. The transfer of data, which Dr. Bernd mentioned a little bit earlier as well, those are very big challenges. And the question is, how can we accelerate this? And it's through, the association of banks and a lot of lobbying and working with the regulators that we need to move this forward. We international banks face the challenge of multiple regulators. And every time we want to, let's introduce open banking in a country, fair share of challenges. And, we have to work ourselves. So standardized the models are globally, the easier it is for us. But unfortunately, we know that is not the case. So very exciting. It's moving in one direction. We all need to get on board. And we need to work out the challenges that face us.
Olivia, did you want to speak to this as well? And do you think that in the future, consumers will be as willing perhaps to give up some of their privacy in exchange for a product or a service? And this is something that we've seen play out with some of the largest platforms in the world, like Facebook, for example, or even in Amazon. Is that what the future looks like in your view?
Yes, thank you, Dan. So in fact, I just want to say as well, security is key, right, for us, because I think when you talk about this aspect, this area, the DNA of banking is more important than the DNA of digital, right, on this area of security, confidentiality, because at the end of the day is what is bringing trust to client. And I say the key difference we have with others is we are regulated. And that's a strength as well, right? Because it gives a level of comfort to our client as well. So obviously we make sure on all this exchange, API, exchange of data and so on, that we have a very strong cybersecurity practice. In fact, cybersecurity team in the digital bank is quite significant in terms of headcount, in proportion of the overall headcount number. People on the data space as well are very important. So I think cybersecurity is 5% of the work people working in a bank, and data is around 20%. So you see just in these two areas, a very strong focus on this. And I think, yes, customer will share or be ready to share data in exchange of something. But I guess it's very important to give clarity and put the customer on a driver's seat. So that's why we make available to our customer at any point in time the data we have available on them. So that has been one of the benefits, right, to start from scratch and following the best regulation in the world, including UAE, to make sure that we build it from scratch, where we have data lineage, right, in organization. Why do we use the data for? And if we are going to use the data, we are going to tell the client, are you okay for us to use the data? And this can give you this. And if the client is not in agreement with that, he will not share his data. So transparency is very important, making people aware of what we have and why we are going to use it for, I think is a best practice. It's expected as well for most customer, I would say.
Okay, so I mean, that's really, really interesting for me, because I think as you look to the potential use case here in the future banking customer, obviously they're going to be putting security and privacy and transparency at the top of their wish list here. Before we take some questions from the audience, and just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question for our executives this morning, please get your questions in now, and we'll try and put them to them before we run out of time. To wrap up though, I would like to ask all of you just to maybe explain how we accelerate open banking in the region from here, and explain to us what you think the biggest challenge to achieving fully implemented open banking in the Middle East is going to be. Olivier, did you want to start?
Yes, so I think it's what as well Dr. Boutros mentioned previously, right? Some kind of regulation is needed. And as well, making sure that you don't create too many differences between the one who are regulated and the one who are not necessarily regulated, unfair advantage. So I think that's really important to happen. I also believe that what we have currently, the data framework in a region is really helping, because open banking is also in a way open data. And I think we have quite comprehensive regulation here in this part of the world. But I just want to throw one kind of thought is I believe that open banking is going to be as well disturbed in a way by DeFi, decentralized finance, which is coming very, very fast. And I think that here you have even, because you need to add as well to open banking, potentially the blockchain technology in terms of, speed of settlement, clearing, as well in terms of being able to add some programming in a solution we are giving to clients. And also, speed, as a lot of evolution on open banking is going to go through payments. And this is where you really need decentralized finance. And I was not very sure about this when I was thinking about, is decentralized finance open banking 2.0? So I did a quick survey last night on LinkedIn, right? And I got 71% thinking, yes, they agree. DeFi is probably the next step, the speed charge kind of open banking. 11% say no, and I think around 19% say you cannot compare the two, they are totally in different leagues. So I think that's interesting, and I think we need to watch as well this space, because DeFi is coming, as you know, very, very fast. I'm very excited with what DBS has been doing in Singapore, I think, together with Standard Chartered in some area. And again, bank will play a key role in that, because bank, in terms of area where bank will always, I believe, be needed, is the risk management, the KYC, the AML, giving some trust on any kind of network. And this may be where it will all evolve. And I think people will be ready as well to pay for this.
Okay, very interesting. Boutros, did you want to comment on that? DeFi coming through, and also how we accelerate open banking around the region, and perhaps some of the challenges that you see on the horizon, if any?
I think, Dan, the most challenging bit for me is the change in mindset. You know, and the region has been, you know, relatively slow to adapt, right? You see the developments happening in Asia, etc. We're catching up, but this entire thing has to adapt. We need to adapt faster. And my challenge has always been the, you know, how do you get the talent pool required to move us faster? You know, it's a function of lifting the, you know, maybe changes in the education of the, you know, the populations of the region, make them more technology savvy. We're seeing some, but not enough to move the dial. That would be the biggest challenge. The rest will come in place. It's a mindset across the board, people, in my opinion. And we have to continuously reinvent ourselves, learn. Change is going to always be there. And so learning, continuous learning is going to be very critical for everyone. So it's internal, if I may put it, as opposed to the rest will come into play.
Bernard, your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Dr. Boutros on the talent, the need for talent, the need to attract and retain talent is absolutely crucial. But I think perhaps the first thing that needs to happen, and Olivier pointed it out as well, is that we need to get a regulation in place. And the regulation we have to make sure that it does create a level playing field. And whether that's in the area of KYC, customer onboarding, but also in the area of customer protection. If you really want this field to go forward, we have to make sure that whatever we do, whether it's open banking or it's standalone fintechs, or it's the decentralized finance, it has to be done in such a way that the same regulation applies to all people providing banking services to clients. Because the moment that you don't do that, the moment you don't have the right KYC regulations in place or the right customer protection, you will damage the trust that is there. And once that's gone, it will be very hard for this to be a success. So that, for me, would be a key element that needs to be put in place and needs to be done fully right.
So one question from the audience here talks about the maturity of the open banking ecosystem in the region versus the rest of the world. And the question is, financial industries and fintechs need to connect industry expertise and experience in and combine it with innovative technology and data analytics to address customer and market problems. But they need to do this by leveraging their own skills and experience to develop new approaches to managing financial crime risks. The question is it fair to say that open banking is at a very early stage in this region? Who would like to tackle that question first?
Yes, Dan, I can take it. I think, yes, if you compare with other regions, particularly Europe, it's at an early stage. But I believe with the technology and with the mindset that we see even, you know, with in the incumbent bank, he has the opportunity to catch up very fast, right? So I'm not very worried about that. I think it's coming. I see initiative everywhere in every bank around the region, and I think I see what you see, what happened with DIFC, with ADGM, with fintech incubator, all that. We are approached by a lot of companies who really want to work with us. So that's very encouraging, and I think that we are going to be able to catch up very quickly in this region.
Mm-hmm. Boutros, Bernard, any thoughts on this question about the maturity of open banking in the region and managing risk?
Sorry, Boutros, go first.
Go ahead, please.
No, I think Olivier is right, and sort of probably the person asking the question intended that as well. We are definitely behind some other parts of the world. We're definitely behind some of the developments in Europe. I think we will be able to pick up quite quickly. And I think in the end, this will all be driven by customers demanding the right type of experience. So the moment that we're able to provide that, the moment that we have the right regulation in place, then I think we will pick up quite quickly. Boutros.
And thank you. My thoughts are a little bit behind, but it's an opportunity to learn from the mistakes made in some of the other areas. So, you know, the catching up will not take us as much time as it took the, you know, other people who were at the, you know, at the front of this initiative. So easy to get there. You know, we just need to align all stakeholders and move in the same direction.
Okay, and just one more question here. With regards to looking ahead in the future, what is the best use case that can be implemented for open banking? So we discussed this a little bit earlier, but what do you see as the number one use case in the region, or the best use cases in the region? And then as an extension to that, what are the top 3 priorities for banks when it comes to implementing open banking in the region? Who would like to take that question?
Well, I think that
sorry, Bernard.
In terms of priority, and I'm repeating to some extent what I said before, but it's clear from our perspective that if we really want to participate in open banking, open finance, if we really want to be part of an ecosystem, then we have to make sure that we upgrade our APIs. That is definitely the key priority for us. And of course, it's easier for us only being active in the UAE than it will be for Dr. Boutros's bank being active in so many countries around the world, but that will be priority number 1. And in terms of use cases, I think that there's plenty. The typical one is sort of the consolidation of data, consolidations of accounts or of other asset classes, or your personal financial management right around that. I think in the payment space, there is a very good range of use cases as well.
Yes, so I would add to that, right, payment, as mentioned, in addition to PFM, which is pretty much already there. I see an opportunity on global ID or ID use case, and also on the corporate side on ERP kind of integration or accounting platform for SMEs and so on, that can be a relevant use case. And to get there, obviously, to have the right platform, and I think everybody is moving towards that, to have a very strong middleware, potentially Kubernetes, able to connect very efficiently through a API gateway and workflow tool. All supported by strong cybersecurity and data analytic solutions.
Yeah. I will, you know, second most of the, you know, comments made, but in my opinion, obviously the regulation is very important, and the entire system, judicial system, regulatory, etc. The technology is going to be key. And I think more importantly for established bank, it's going to be the culture, the people, the reskilling. It will require new, you know, skill sets that we need to incorporate within our organization. So it's very exciting, you know, and it's moving in one direction. So, you know, it's... Well, we just need to do the best we can to get there as fast as we can, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And we have one more question from the audience before we let you go. The question is, in Europe, the digital disruption came on the back of the global financial crisis. In the GCC, many banks have strong brand value and trust. Banking account penetration in the GCC generally is quite high. Traditional banking is fairly convenient and already fairly digital. What do you think digital banking penetration could be, keeping in mind the above? Bernard?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite questions, to be honest. It's because I do believe that many banks in the world, but definitely in the region, have become digital to a very large extent. I also do believe that banks in this region typically have been way ahead of some other regions. I remember when I came to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia 15 years ago, the things I could do on an ATM there were miles ahead of anything that I could do in my home country, the Netherlands. And I think that sort of has continued. So I think it's hard to make money in banking. It's almost impossible to make money in banking without lending. And the sort of the big challenge will be for the digital banks. And I'm looking with great interest in how Olivier is going to manage this. Is to make money while you compete with lots of incumbents that have already developed their digital proposition and that know how to make money on the back of lending. So that to me will be the absolute key going forward.
Olivier, did you want to respond to that? How are you going to make your number?
Okay, I think we'll have a lending kind of. We have the same capital requirement that any other bank in UAE, because in UAE there is no concept of digital bank license, so we have to apply for a full bank license. So we are quite comfortable for that. And talking about the penetration, right? It's not about the number necessarily, but it's the quality. What you can do, what you can provide to your customer and clients. And I think the idea, and I think was mentioned as well by Dr. Boutros and Dr. Bend, is really how you can help people on the day-to-day lives. That's very important, because most human activity, I think 70% of any human activity end up into a financial transaction. So how we can be there when early in a stage where we can really help them. And I think that's key, how we can improve the level of service we are providing, building on it, adding new services. And all that will come through ecosystem, collaboration, partnership. And it's not only a technology integration, it's a business integration as well, which is really important to do. If you just go for a technology integration, it's not going to work. But how we can work with ecosystem, there are a lot of ecosystems. There are a lot of corporate who are as well in this country transforming themselves, not only as a bank on digitalizing, but they digitalize. When we go to see corporate, they bring us people who are working with Amazon before. So they talk data, how we can integrate, what kind of value we can add. And I think is where we can really make a difference and add value.
Dr. Boutros, I'll give you the final say before we wrap up.
I think the new generation is more, savvy and inclined to be, more and more digital. So as we look at spectrum of clients, right, there will be the traditional, generation, and there will be the more digital savvy, and we see the dexterity of our children with some of the devices. They don't want to go into a bank. They don't know what it's about. Whereas the older generation, if they don't go and see their banker, they're not comfortable with there is the trust issue that surfaces. So there will be different client segments with different needs. We will be able in some of countries to access to financial services, to sectors that have struggled to get banked by the by the normal banking sector for various reasons. The competition is going to be fierce, without a doubt. But again, it's exciting, and we need to do what we need to do to stay ahead of the curve. And some will survive, and some will fade, without a doubt.
This is going to be fascinating to see how this develops. I really appreciate the opportunity to ask you all questions today. Thank you for sharing your time, your knowledge, your insights. Looking forward to seeing you on CNBC very soon. And thanks again for being part of this event. Roma, with that, we'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you to all our panelists. Before we let you and Dan go, can we quickly have you pose for a nice group picture? And then our team is here. They're going to take a quick picture. So I'll give you 5 seconds. We take a quick picture and then we wrap up. So here we go. Brilliant. With that, it's a wrap. Thank you
I
so
took a
much,
picture too.
Dr. Byrne. Yes, Dr. Byrne, Dr. Boutros, Olivia, and Dan, thank you so, so very much for being a part of this wonderful and very insightful panel discussion. We look forward to seeing you all soon at yet another Open Banking Summit. So thank you so much. With that, it's a wrap for this panel discussion, and we move on to our next discussion now. So with open banking coming into effect in the GCC in the immediate to near future, the question really becomes, will you ride the wave or will you wait too long to get washed over by the same wave? So some of the region's major banks are all prepared to ride the wave and gain the first mover advantage. So for our next discussion, I'm honored to welcome Mr. Miguel Rio Tinto, the Chief Information Officer for Emirates NBD. Miguel leads Emirates NBD's 1 billion dirham end-to-end IT transformation. He also leverages his combination of technology leadership experience in leading banking institutions alongside his advisory background as a partner at McKinsey & Company. And I'm equally excited to welcome the host for this session, Richie Santos Diaz, Economic Development Advisor and Head of MEA, the FinTech Times and the FinTech 50. Richie is an economic development advisor who has worked with various governments and multinationals in the management consulting space. Welcome to both the gentlemen, and Richie, it's over to you now.
Thank you so much. Welcome to today's exclusive interview. And again, my name is Richie Santos Diaz, and I'm today's host. And I have the honor to do an exclusive interview today with Miguel Rio Tinto from Emirates NBD. Miguel, do you want to come up on screen now and just say a quick hello?
Hey, hello, how are you? I hope you can see me.
We can definitely see you, and we can see the blue, the famous blue.
So
for today's session, I have the honor to interview Miguel, who is the Chief Information Officer at Emirates NBD. And throughout this interview, the audience that's tuning in today, if you have any questions you wanted to ask Miguel after this, pending on time, we'll definitely try to answer at least a question or two. So on to the exclusive interview right now, Miguel, with you. So, you have a very impressive career, as was highlighted earlier, and obviously you have a lot of know-how and experience in the GCC and beyond. So my first question is, as open banking has spread across the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, what open banking trends have you seen, Miguel, across the fintech space specifically within the last 2 years? Yeah. In other words, in a pre and a during COVID-19 world.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, we've been seeing open banking flourish in many parts of the world. You know that in Europe, we've seen it come stronger in the UK, in continental Europe as well. But since I've joined here about three and a half years ago, I've seen fantastic rise in open banking in the region as well. Some countries like Bahrain, they have, as you know, adopted a regulatory framework around it. Framed and inspired by the PSD2 European Continental Europe framework. In other parts, we've seen a more market developed type of approach to open banking. This is the case of the main market that we operate on, which is the UAE, where actually more than 3 years ago, we started actually transforming to be able to enable open banking and enable API exposure on any business domain to partners and to fintechs outside, even if the regulatory framework was not there. So overall, the trends we're seeing is that in the markets where regulation has actually come through, I mean, we see the adoption of this open banking framework and the APIs being available under a standard, and of course, many fintechs and innovators leveraging those APIs and actually accessing aggregated information and data from banks or initiating payments. In other parts, in other countries, so Saudi Arabia, UAE, and so on, a more market-driven approach. But I would say that the use cases we are seeing, the development we are seeing, is not that we are being left behind. It's just a different approach to how open banking is flourishing, actually.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. I think in this region, it's been very different in terms of the approach. And obviously, throughout the rest of the world, it's been much There's no one kind of response to it. So I want to specifically start focusing more on Emirates NBD. I mean, obviously the intro, you're heading quite a lot of money and a lot of digital transformation. So what has been Emirates NBD's response with regards to wider digital transformation? And can you, Miguel, elaborate about how technology can be a game changer as well for the banks to be able to capitalize on the emerging opportunities from open banking?
Yeah. So first of all, a little bit on the why. Why is it important that a bank like Emirates NBD, remember, we are present in 7 markets. So in the UAE, we are the incumbent, a large bank in the UAE. In other markets like Egypt and KSA, we are small, and of course with ambitious expansion plans as well. But why is it that open banking then is important, both for us as an incumbent in the UAE and then us as a challenger in those markets? Now, there's a strong belief here at Emirates NBD that innovation, of course, will come from within, but innovation will also come from outside. It will come from fintechs with great ideas that would take this data that we have, that would take these transaction, customer data, and so on, and they could do fantastic things with this data and actually create value to end customers. It's all also about understanding that in order for you to be present on all these value chains, you actually have to make yourself transparent, but present and integrated with those value chains as well. So APIs also are very important there. So this a little bit more from the perspective of the incumbent here. If you think about other markets where actually are the challenger, we can actually leverage an open banking framework, the existence of the possibility to aggregate accounts from other players or to initiate payments in other players as well. We can actually use that as an engine for growth as well, because there, as you can imagine, we're small. Of course, we want to grow digitally, but we have to leverage a more competitive stance where we actually have to take the opportunity of open banking, actually use that as a tool to actually grow in those markets as well. So from that perspective, open banking has been recognized as very important to us, both as an incumbent in the UAE, but also as a challenger in the markets where we are smaller. Now, we could not wait for a regulatory framework to be set up in place in all these markets. So what we've decided to do is, okay, specifically on open banking, we need to be out there and expose as many as our business domains through APIs as possible. We should use a framework where our channels, our own consumption of those APIs will be exactly the same as the consumption of the APIs we are offering to our partners and to our fintechs. And so 3 years ago, we started actually a transformation journey on the technology side to actually enable that. And it's not just about a gateway, it's not just about a middleware, it's much more than that. In order for you to take your whole spectrum of business domains, it's not just individual account information or payment initiation for retail accounts. It's things like all the retail assets side, all the SME segments as well. And beyond that, all the trade finance opportunity that is out there as well. So if you truly think about open banking, even much beyond that, what is being done in the UK and in Europe, where they focus just on a narrow spectrum of use cases, what we've decided is, okay, let's expose all of this, more than 700 APIs that actually give access to all these domains. And to do that, as I was explaining, it's not just about a gateway or a middleware. It's a complete holistic IT transformation. And this is why the 1 billion transformation. And what is it that is required there? Things like a complete transformation of our backends. We need to make available in all the countries where we are present, a consolidated, standardized backend systems where you can expose the kind of APIs in Egypt that you would expose in the UAE without having to redo the investment on our backends. So a standardization, consolidation of backends. So a lot around application architecture. So the way that you expose these microservices that you need to expose with the APIs, the way you orchestrate the calls to your backends, complete change in how you manage your front ends and how you develop your front ends, a new a new age of a completely user experience and user interface that has to be richer and has to compete with the best that is out there. And of course, wrapping all of this, even the way that you work, bringing agility into the IT development process, better interfacing between business and IT. So how do I set up that business is actually in charge of the innovation and the backlogs for all that I developed within Emirates NBD. So all of that was a comprehensive transformation that we started in 2017. We just finished that. And actually now a wave of digital innovation leveraging that is coming, both from within the business with fantastic ideas on digitizing customer journeys and so on, making them completely STP as much as possible, straight through, no humans involved, using, of course, new ways of taking automatic decisions around underwriting, around compliance, around customer screening, payment screening, and so on, which will require, of course, data-driven machine learning models and so on. So all of that has to come together now. But it's not just only from the internal teams that want to expose these functionalities out there. It's also from the outside. So we've set up a sandbox for fintechs to engage with us, exposing these APIs there, so making them available for them, these 600 APIs. We have more than 200 fintechs engaging through our sandbox. And there are already very, very interesting use cases that we're developing with them around trade finance, around payment initiation outside of the traditional schemes like Visa and MasterCard. So a lot of things are happening at the moment.
Excellent. And my next question, you kind of touched quite a bit of it already, because obviously you're overseeing this 1 billion digital transformation dirham fund, and you became the first regional bank to kind of set this transformation at its core banking to API-based infrastructure. So how do you see deriving value briefly in terms of all these investments that you've been doing in terms of fintech and open banking, Miguel?
Yeah. So again here, on the technology transformation, it's just a platform. With the technology transformation, we actually reach nowhere. It's how you leverage these new technologies, these new stacks that you've been building that then will provide value to the bank. But without having done these investments, a lot of banks will struggle. And it's very easy maybe to do one use case on exposing some information around your accounts. But if you really want to think about open banking and what is coming in the future, as you think beyond the retail segment and the mass market segment, and then you think about SMEs and corporates, if you think about covering what a bank like Emirates NBD from a business perspective is currently catering to, which is not just current accounts, and it's much more than that. It's of course lending to individuals, personal loans, auto loans, home loans. It's SME lending. It is then corporate business as well. It is trade finance. It's very important in this region. Trade finance is extremely important. So if you really want to have and expose such a broad set of capabilities through APIs, through open banking, you really have to do these investments, and they are not small. The value is now coming from two things, as I explained. One is, so now top down, the bank very seriously understands that the future is for everything that we should do in terms of servicing and sales to move to a digital channel, ideally self-serviced, not assisted, and STP as much as possible. STP means that it's not just that it's digitized, it's that no human touches except the customer to the full end-to-end fulfillment of the journey. So if you think about an STP journey on personal loans, that would mean that from the customer due diligence to the underwriting, you have to have not just the journey and the UX and the experience end-to-end, the STP fulfillment, but you also have to have the underwriting models. You also have to have the customer screening models that would be sufficiently automatic so that nobody touches, no human touches while this journey is being performed. And this is what enables then in the end, this extraordinary customer experience. So we are now leveraging the technology we put forward, not just the ability to orchestrate these fantastic journeys, to have these APIs available, but also a strong investment on analytics, trying to understand where are the places where humans are now taking decisions, understanding how can we model that in a way that the machines can take most of the decisions, what is the human doing that the machines can do. And once you start bringing all of that together, which is so API-driven journeys, end-to-end fulfillment, STP, data-driven decision-making by the machines, with models that you teach and that you calibrate here, then you start achieving what the value behind this. This is one part, which is how we will leveraging this with our own channels, our online banking and so on. But then there's another aspect to this, which is increasingly we are seeing partners approach us where I would like to initiate the payment for something in my e-commerce site, but where I want not just to debit the account, but I want to buy now, pay later, for example, and I want to partner with you to enable that, so that my sales can be grown in my e-commerce portal. So we have several players approaching us with use cases on buy now, pay later, direct debit from the accounts, trade finance use cases where the supply chain is happening in a different parties portal, but then they are financing this through our trade finance services and APIs. So the value is now materializing. But again, as I was saying, these investments have to be done, and they are material. It's not just buying another tool that you then hook up to your architecture. It's a complete transformation that you have to enable to be able to do this. Remember, as we are doing again across 7 geographies with a standardized offering, we have all the APIs that we have in the UAE, we have available in KSA, and we have available in Egypt and any other of our geographies.
Excellent. And it's a Q&A between me and you, but I want to open it to the audience as well. So due to time, I want to ask you one more question, Miguel, and then I'll open it to the floor for those that are tuning in to ask you a question as well. Okay. So my question to you is, and you kind of mentioned it already in terms of, some and the previous sessions as well today in terms of what can be done in the region, but I want to kind of do the future question. So in the future, Miguel, say in 3 years' time, where will the GCC as a whole be, you think, in open banking? And do you think that the GCC can become an example as an innovator within the space as well? And if so, why?
Yeah, no, I truly believe that the GCC as a whole can be a benchmark in this area. Absolutely. So again, you have different countries that are at a different stage within their banking maturity, their digital maturity, and then their open banking maturity. We have very, very different places here in the GCC. But one thing that you can already recognize is that innovation, especially banking innovation, for the region as a whole, we have fantastic, sophisticated offerings that you don't see anywhere in Europe, you don't see anywhere in the US. If you go to countries like Saudi Arabia, if you go to countries like the UAE, if you go to countries like Bahrain. So I believe that actually the region can play a tremendous role. There are 2 or 3 reasons for that I would like to highlight. One is the first one is so most of the banks in the region are not burdened typically by legacy 50-year-old infrastructure, mainframe, and so on, where it makes it very, very difficult for some of the banks in the US to perform these transformations. And this is, again, not just a layer that you change. If you really want to think about open banking as the future way of exposing your capabilities outside, then you really have to do this transformation, including the core as well. So I think that technologically, there is a better place here than we can see in other markets. The second one is even if there's no regulatory framework, a lot of the champion banks in the region have actually moved very, very fast and ahead with understanding that open banking is very important, with engaging with fintechs, and they actually have their own strategies and develop their own strategies around that. The region as a whole, especially here in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE, also in Saudi Arabia, in other places, you also see fantastic innovation around fintechs, and then they are choosing these places to come and to actually innovate and actually bring new ideas and develop their own businesses. So I believe all the components are there for us to prosper and to actually be at the forefront of banking. remember, it's not just about open banking. Even if you look now at what you can do in some of our markets here in the GCC compared to the rest of the world, I think we are a benchmark region. I say that with knowledge of what is happening in Latin America, what is happening in the US, what is happening even in Europe and continental Europe and the UK, and also what is happening in Asia. I believe Asia and the Middle East can actually play a benchmark role here. So one recommendation is that, still, even if we are pushing forward some layers, some framework around a regulatory standard around open banking would be beneficial. So why do I say that? It will be beneficial on two fronts. One, because whenever each bank has proposed their own standards, let's say it like that. Now, so that we propose our own APIs. Of course, we got inspired by the standards that existed elsewhere. So we use the same technology, the same RESTful APIs, and so on. We try to mimic as much as possible the consent management, that data privacy type of regulation that exists in other markets that have put forward regulation around open banking. But I believe that standardizing and aligning the banks to what they should expose, and aligning them on the privacy mechanisms around open banking. So how do I make sure that it is the customer that is actually giving consent to access the data, to access the services in the banks, and not something that is decided between the bank and whoever they are integrating with? I think that would be extremely beneficial. Now, if we can have that, not just in Bahrain as we have now, but also in other countries in the region, that would be fantastic. If that could be even I'm just now raising the bar on the aspiration, but if that could even be something which is aligned between the different countries in the region, that would even be better, because then we would be working with the same technology standards, the same functional specs, the same coverage that we need to give and so on the APIs. That would be great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And now I'm going to champion the audience to send you some questions. And Miguel, you're a very popular guy, but time isn't popular at the moment. So I could probably get one or two. So the first one here is, from the audience, what's the importance of organization culture? Sorry, what's the importance of organization culture when it comes to digital transformation?
Yeah, so it's extremely important. So typically large banks, I think this was stated before in one of the panels, it's sometimes easier to define a greenfield process, thinking about it digitally and so on, than to change many of the processes you have internally. And especially if you're a large bank, then of course, because of your responsibilities, then you for sure have large compliance teams, large risk teams, large operations teams. So the stakeholder alignment between all of this is extremely important, and that having the culture aligned on, we need to bring these journeys to a digital world, and we need them STP, and we need them as much aligned with open banking as possible, is extremely important, and it is extremely difficult. By the way, and one thing I think we have as a plus is we have large enough champions in the region where we are big enough to do the investments, but we are still small enough to have the complexity on all the alignment across a very big organization. So I think that in that respect, culture is extremely important. Changing the culture is extremely important, and of course, I think we are in a sweet spot actually in the GCC with the size of our champions, our regional champions, to be able to do that. Now, a very important point, sometimes you have to take some more disruptive approaches. You know that Emirates NBD at one point decided to launch a completely digital bank for the millennial. We launched Live in the UAE. It's quite a known bank. It's actually a virtual bank. It doesn't have a standalone license. Live just crossed the mark of 500,000 customers. That was achieved in 2.5 years. Just an information for you to have, Live opens digitally more accounts per month than all the branches together of Emirates NBD, the main bank. So it is actually the way that consumers now really want to engage with banks is truly digitally. And you can see that a millennial focused bank right now is opening many more accounts every month than the main bank. Now, why did we do that? Of course, really streamline the value proposition and really target that segment, but also to be able to change processes internally so that we would have like a greenfield approach to them. And of course, once we cracked it, for example, for account opening with Live, then we brought that process to the main bank as well. And it's an interesting fact, 75% of the accounts open every month now in the main bank as well are coming from our mobile digital channel. So it's no longer the branch that opens the accounts. 75% of the accounts opened are coming actually from the digital channel. So sometimes to change culture, and because culture is so important, you have to carve out something that you start forever for you to be able to leverage and then bring to the main bank as well.
So that was actually my second and final question was somebody was asking about Live. So you telepathically read my mind and the guy's mind as well. So that kind of concludes that final question that was for you. So thank you for answering the question on Live. I want to end today's exclusive interview with you, Miguel. It has been a pleasure. I think the audience found it very useful and hope you guys enjoy the rest of today's summit.
Thank you. Pleasure, Richie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Miguel and Richie, for this wonderfully enriching session. Thank you very much. We hope all our attendees found it super, super beneficial. So thank you for that. And now moving on, we move towards our next panel discussion for the day. So as the GCC region prepares itself for the upcoming open banking regulations, it is important to hear from and learn from those who have walked the talk. So in our next panel discussion, we discuss global best practices from the UK and the other parts of the world. Let's start with our moderator who you've already been introduced to. She is Noha Shakir, founder and CEO of Egyptian FinTech Association and Vice President of African FinTech Association, who's going to be hosting this pivotal discussion. Welcome back, Noha. And I'm excited to be welcoming our senior panel of speakers for this session. We have Elise Wong, Senior Executive Vice President and Head of Transformation for Technology and Innovation at Mashreq Bank. At Mashreq, Elise spearheads delivery of enterprise solutions, data and analytics, and digital transformation while future-proofing the organization and ensuring Mashreq's IT infrastructure is aligned with its wider strategic objectives. Up next is Grant Niven, Head of Group Digital for Banque Saudi Fransi. In his current role, Grant is accountable for defining and executing the bank-wide digital vision and strategic initiatives across the organization. Next up, we have Hetal Popat, Director of Open Banking for HSBC Group. Hetal is Global Product Lead for HSBC and is responsible for delivery and outcomes for open banking services across the group. HSBC is now live with open banking services in 18 markets accessed by more than 500,000 customers. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Paolo Barbacino, Senior Vice President and Head of Multi-Channel Banking at Emirates NBD. In his capacity as Head of Multi-Channel Banking, Paolo heads the retail digital operations for the domestic market and is in charge of the retail digital transformation at the group level. Warm welcome to all of you gentlemen, and Noha, now it's over to you to take the discussion. Once again, Noha will be unable to switch on her video due to a technical glitch so that we can hear her clearly through the audio. Over to you, Noha.
Thank you very much, Rahma, for the introduction. I'd like to thank our participants for being here and joining us today. And I definitely want to welcome our panelists for today. Another interesting discussion covering a completely but complementary side of open banking. We have taken a look at the regulator's perspective, at how a regulator-driven model has worked in other markets like the UK and the like. Now it is about time to look deeper into the business side of things. We are going to be looking at some success stories that were carried out by other banks, critical success factors of how banks should be approaching open banking to reap the benefit out of it and have it as a means to actually grow business instead of perceiving it as a competition from fintechs and other players. We are going to be looking into the opportunities that open banking brings in with to the business and the multiple technologies that can enable that business growth. We are going to look into how, but definitely how other roles that regulators can play aside from putting in the regulatory framework. We're going to look into how they can build actual capacity to support open banking. And definitely we are going to be looking into how can we push customer adoption in open banking and learn from countries that have actually managed to do that. We are looking into some of the risks, of course, and challenges that are associated to open banking from a business perspective. I would like to welcome my panelists again. And I wish to start with Paulo, since unfortunately he's going to have to leave a panel a bit earlier to attend to a pressing business need. Paulo, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the role of the regulator, other roles that they can play. I mean, we have seen them in other markets actually building a capacity to enable the entire open banking ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. No,
can you please
I think that
elaborate on that? Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, this is indeed quite a crucial topic, because open banking is not only about technology. We had a pretty thorough discussion or presentation about what developing an open banking offering requires from a technology point of view in the previous session, where our Emirates NBD CIO was describing how crucial setting up microservice API-based core banking infrastructure is for the development of open banking. But there's like open banking per se as a set of standard is not enough to decide what is the role that it will play in a consumer's life. And if you look around the world, you see that there are just like basically 2 or 3 major different approaches to open banking. So you have like what is broadly known as being like the European approach, both in the UK and in the European Union, with open banking regulation in London and PSD2 in the European Union, where you clearly see that open banking is initiated by the regulator with the explicit purpose of empowering consumers. So open banking fits into a broader scheme of things, where you have 2 other major pillars, one being the privacy and data protection regulation, and the other one being a digital identity framework. So when you combine these 3 pillars within an overall regulatory framework where consumers are protected per se, you see that introducing an open banking framework will lead to shifting the core of the banking relationship from the bank to the customer. I remember back in the days in Europe, when I was still working there, a colleague describing the impact of PSD2 as we are giving back customers the control of their money. I mean, this is perhaps too much. Customers have always been in control of their money, but it's like really giving the full ownership of the relationship a customer have with the entire banking industry. You can look at along these lines. You can also look at what is happening in other geographies, like in Singapore, where the regulator is not only playing the role of setting the standards, but is also developing the technology that is enabling this. And this is like a step further that is perhaps accelerating the development of open banking standard. And this is like a very different landscape that what you see in areas, geographies like the US, where open banking standards are the result of industry initiatives. So where the regulator is not playing a significant role in setting the framework for open banking. And this, like, it will definitely increase the efficiency of the banking processes across different financial institutions, but is not necessarily designed to lead to a change in the core of the relationship or empowering the consumers, as I was mentioning.
Thank you very much. And that raising that point actually opened the door to another follow-up question. What are the pros and cons of each of those models in there to open banking? So should we support the industry-led model here in the GCC and the Arab world, or should we go ahead with the regulators driven one, similar to what happened in the UK?
Hello?
Which one do you think, Paulo, should be adopted to actually help and support?
Yeah, so if you look at what's happening in the region, you see that there are just like countries like Bahrain and KSA that either do have open banking standards or they already announced that they will soon have open banking standards. Again, as our CIO was mentioning in the previous panel, in the previous segment, the setting up a core banking infrastructure based following the tenets of open banking is bringing definitely efficiency across the board. So even if you do not intend to adopt any business model that is enabled by open banking, building up an infrastructure following open banking standards is already bringing in a lot of efficiency. So this is a starting point. I think that majority of banks of large banks in the country are moving towards RESTful API standards for the core banking, that are not only covering like the account information and the payment initiation, they're covering many more domains. And this is a very good starting point. The difference between a regulated and unregulated is the level of competition that you may trigger, and is the impact on how what is the role the customer can play in setting the content of a banking relationship. So this is like this, I would say, is the main difference.
Thank you very, very much, Paulo, for your input. Well, a few years ago, the buzzword has always been all about digital transformation within banks, assigning budgets to get rid of the legacy systems, build the right technology infrastructure for the future. Now the buzzword has been open banking, open finance, open data, and definitely open APIs to actually enable that ecosystem of financial services. We are looking into changes in operating models, changes in business models across banks to actually accommodate and to benefit from that change. We have even seen some predictions into the future that banks that are going to be able to actually grow and continue to be in business are the ones who are going to shift from offering end-to-end financial services to actually becoming an ecosystem enabler, becoming a platform that brings together the best of the financial services that are being offered out there by multiple players to its customers. That takes us to the importance of having that supportive ecosystem in there. And I actually wish to direct that question to Alice. Alice, how do we build that open banking ecosystem? And how can technologies like AI, data analytics can actually support that and help building the open banking value proposition to use the opportunities that are there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, I'm a new banker. I just joined Marshall Bank for a year. Before the Marshall, I come from Alipay and Tencent. So that is very interesting, open banking. But why we need to open banking is because our customer need us to open everything for their service. So that's why we need to build an ecosystem, because our customer need a diversity, the service, not the bank service, is the banking service. What the difference, bank and banking? That means we need to provide different type of the service to generation Y, to generation Z, and the generation T. What's the difference? Generation Y, maybe they will go to your branch, have the face-to-face service. But for the generation Z and T, they are used touch, they are using the mobile, they are using the social. They want to have the new type of service to them, like a digital currency. So it's the new disruptive business we need to build on banking technology. So that's why we need to open banking, because we want to service our customer, because that we leverage new emerging technology like data-driven, like AI technology. It's the new disruptive innovation business to this industry. So we are not talking about a CASA, loan management, risk only. We need to think about how we to build disrupted service to your generation Z and T. Otherwise, they will leverage the service from Amazon, from the Facebook, from the Google, because they know IoT. They know their customer. They have a huge data, can analyze, predict your behavior. As a bank, we need to open it through integrated technology, embrace AI data to build some disruptive technology and service to our SYZ generation customer. Otherwise, they will go away from us. So that's why we need open banking. It's not because of the technology. It's because we need to open our service to our client based on their need to select right technology to support it. Like maybe generation T will use the touch technology. They will not sign any check because they use touch, use face recognition. And they use the 5G, 5 seconds, they do everything. So open banking is the foundation for the bank to embrace new technology to design next 5 years disrupt service. That is very important. It's the key. If we only focus on the current existing bank service, they will not make our generation T and generation Z customer feel happy. They will go to another way. That's my input.
Thank you. That is wonderful. And again, we actually have a relevant question in here that you may need to attend to as well. So we want to keep our customers of different generations happy, but again, that may create certain concerns that related to how can you tackle issues like data protection. Again, you are going to be opening your data that has always rested within banks for many, many years to third parties. And that's a question that was actually raised by Supra in here.
Yeah, definitely. When we talk about a disruptive technology, you always have the issue for the risk, for the operation, for the data privacy. But as I mentioned, the data is the disrupted business and opportunity. Cloud also, because that never happened to generation Y before. But for the generation T and Z, they are love to share everything to their client, customer. Why? Because they are not really 100% want to keep privacy, because they can get a benefit from the social. So thinking about when we talk about this trapped technology, it must be have a pro and con. You have to balance it. So I came from Alipay almost 8 years ago. Everybody don't believe data driven, because how they can image the data can help business operation, because all manually, everything is designed by people, designed by rules. So we call a rule-based process. But now we talk about it's an AI process. It's using a machine to service you and also to design, we call the machine customer. Because for bank to bank, that is maybe the deal is made by machine. It's not made by people. So we need to have the open-minded to rethink how we to balance the privacy, the data privacy and technology application. That is a really good question to discuss.
Thank you very, very much, Alice, for the input. Definitely insightful. Again, we see a lot of changes that are happening in how we do business as bankers. One of the most critical decisions and processes that runs at the heart of every bank is the credit assessment decision that is always associated with the lending side. We have a question in here regarding how successful do you see alternative lending scorecards that are non-reliant on traditional financial data, credit information. Do you see that actually happening in the UK, in the GCC, and with a focus on the UAE? And that question goes to Hetal. And Hetal, from your own point of view, what are the critical success factors as well that can make open banking of value, not just to customers, but also to incumbent banks?
Yeah, good afternoon and thank you. So credit is an area that HSBC has really focused on since open banking went live in the UK. Let me give you a few examples to bring that to life. And we've seen it as having added significant value to our credit offering. So initially, when we first launched open banking as a regulatory outbound service, we started to, through a proof of concept, consume other banks' payment account data when new to bank customers were applying for unsecured loans. And what we found is that our approval rate increased substantially. And the reason, when we looked through the data to understand it, was with new to bank customers, there was a high incidence of having insufficient data from the credit bureau to get a positive credit outcome. That's not because the customer is not creditworthy, it's because we don't have enough data to prove they are. Responsible lending is all about satisfying yourself about the customer's position. By adding their checking account history from other banks, we found we then were able to prove significantly more customers were creditworthy and were then able to offer facilities to them. As a result of that, we've taken that proof of concept and over the last 24 months industrialized that. So we are now automating the process of capturing customer open banking data from other banks, building it into our automated scorecard-driven credit assessment process for loans, cards and mortgages across 3 different brands in the UK, Core HSBC, First Direct and also M&S Bank. So that's 9 different origination channels all operating using this. And in broad terms, around about 50% of customers who are applying for a facility with us voluntarily, there's no compulsion, voluntarily choose to share their data from another bank with us to help us make that credit assessment. Now, what does it do for the customer? If you are not an HSBC customer and you have an incomplete credit history, During the process, you may well be asked to share statements or other data, and you have to find a way to upload that to us, which might mean you either have to scan it or take a photo on your phone and upload it to us. We then have to consume that data, which is messy because it's coming through in a variety of formats, images and so on. And that creates a poor response and also time. And often just incomplete data sets because customers, of course, make mistakes. These processes are boring and frustrating for them. Instead, when you use open banking data from a golden source, another bank, we get a data set which has the customer's name embedded within it, so we know it's non-fraudulent, and it's a complete data set structured so we can consume it directly into our data processing engine. Better for everyone. Lower cost and effort, if you count effort as cost, for the customer. Clearly lower cost and lower operational risk for us because the data is clean for coming from a golden source. Overall time to process is lower, and therefore everyone's a winner. And most importantly, the quality of data is higher, therefore the ability to make good quality loans, which mean the bank doesn't end up with bad debts, or less likely to, and the customer is less likely to end up in distress. Poor credit decisions have consequences for both parties. So everybody is a winner through using open banking to originate loans and other credit products. We're now doing the same for collections journeys. Thanks to the pandemic, in all markets we see there are many consumers who are unfortunately in a position of great distress. Think of all our colleagues in society who work in travel, hospitality, some of the sectors that have been most acutely hit by this severe challenge. Many of them have suffered real changes in their financial circumstances, and of course that creates credit stress, which they could not have anticipated, the lender could not have anticipated. Now we need to work with them collaboratively to get them on the best possible product to help them work their way through this in a very uncertain environment, but we have to help. Again, being able to collect checking account data directly from their main bank in a seamless way means instead of having a process which requires them to upload data, potentially get it wrong, have a repair in operations, waste time, frustration at a time when the customer is feeling very nervous and anxious. Of course they are, we're talking about their homes in many cases. We now got an automated, straight-through way to collect that data and then have the positive conversation about here are your options. We understand your position and we want to help you, so here's what we can do. That's how open banking helps in credit. It's a complete game changer. And customers are already, as I said, in approximately 50% of cases, without any compulsion or incentive, choosing to do it because they can see, we trust HSBC, we want to do business with you, this is something we're happy to do. But I think it goes beyond credit, and so credit's a really important use case, and because of the limitations of UK and European implementation, where it's just payment data, credit's perhaps the most important use case in the short term. But if you look at other markets, for example Singapore, where you have a much broader set of data already available, that's also the direction of travel if you look at Hong Kong, Australia and other markets. Bahrain already has many more types of products available. What you see is the use cases go beyond credit and move perhaps to wealth management as well. I think JP Morgan's recent announcement of the acquisition of Nutmeg as a leading robo-based wealth advisor tells you where open banking could go on that side. Imagine a robo-advisor which has the ability to collect wealth and long-term savings and investments and pensions product data on customers, aggregate that and then make intelligent recommendations. That starts to become a really attractive business model at the opposite end of the banking spectrum. So I don't think we need to constrain ourselves to the credit side. I think that's just where the European and UK implementations go. But as you move to wider open data, I think it's going to impact all of our service offerings. The third area that I would focus on is commercial. An interesting statistic that people never expect to hear, and we didn't expect to see in practice, is that commercial banking adoption or commercial customer adoption of open banking is more than 3x retail banking adoption. More than 3x. And that's real production data as at last month here in the UK. Now, Why is that? And why did none of us expect that? That's the other interesting bit here. If you think about the way commercial banking works, for large corporates, we have for a long time had complex system integrations between banks and the ERP providers, enabling automation of data flows in both directions. But SME customers, small and medium-sized enterprises, could never benefit from that fully because those integrations were expensive. With open banking and open APIs, we've standardized that data structure. We've massively reduced the cost of consuming that data because there's apps out there for almost no cost, which will do it for you. And now SME customers can benefit from the services that larger corporates have had for many, many years. And what do we see? Of course, they want it. SMEs want to focus on running their business, not managing their finances. Anything that gives them productivity benefits, that automates things, is of real value. And this isn't futuristic, this is happening today. Over a quarter of our SME customers are now active users of open banking. That's a real game changer.
Well, that's yeah, well, it definitely is. I mean, being a banker myself, I have witnessed a lot of challenges that my corporate customers and the SME ones have been facing for years. I mean, the fact that you run 3 or 4 banking relationships and you have to have an entire team in charge of consolidating all of that into one single profile where you can actually manage your finances. You have a treasurer who works on all the data accumulation. I mean, now it can be done at a press of a button thanks to open banking. And now that banks are obliged to actually share customer data upon the request. I mean, you would look into at services like sweeping and pooling that was like a disaster to run across multiple banks and multiple relationships. I mean, this is wonderful, definitely for customers. But again, does it open and create forms of competition that banks perhaps are not ready for right now? And that question goes to Grant. I mean, how can banks, the incumbents, actually collaborate and work with fintechs to create most value for customers, and perhaps also close certain performance gaps that banks may have present that fintechs or other non-banking financial service providers can help and support with?
Thank you, Noah. And I think, Hetal, to your point, just I would say great examples of how open banking is actually being delivered in practice. I've watched HSBC be a first mover in terms of the global banks, in terms of building out and grabbing hold of the opportunity. So it's good to see those use cases. And I think just to your question, Noah, from a broader ecosystem point of view, I guess the big prize around open banking, certainly from my perspective and my broader BSF leadership team's point of view, is to be the financial layer in the digital economy. If you can build the infrastructure, and we've had various different inputs around having the technology assets, the API infrastructure in place to be able to collaborate and securely collaborate, it creates great opportunity. And I know certainly there's other business models feed off this. So ultimately, open banking, the sharing of data, is a foundational point which then can allow businesses such as banks to go out and build additional service lines and move into areas like banking as a service. I certainly know that customer experience and what Ellis and others have discussed is front of mind in terms of what customers are looking for now. So our digital native customer base, interesting stats like Liv, and more accounts being opened by Liv, a digital only bank, than in the branch network anymore. And a lot of that's through ultimately building great experiences. And you can only do that if you can collaborate effectively in the digital world. So I think the key ingredients for me are around, to get great customer experience, you need to kind of rethink the value proposition. Open banking is a lot more than just a fancy mobile interface. It's a lot more than just meeting a compliance deadline. If a regulator, such as in the case of us in Saudi Arabia with the Central Bank of Saudi, SAMA, putting in place very clear guidelines around open banking is coming, but it's about embracing how you actually look at your business model, using technology assets to ultimately deliver something that's differential to the customer and gives them more breadth and variety. So I think there's a couple key things that are needed. So typically banks have been very poor at managing data. Other third parties, trusted third parties, are much better. And actually through collaborating and working together to come up with some of those interesting propositions, you can really differentiate in the market. There's an argument that traditional banks in our a very steadfast way of we can build great products, but actually we've already seen in the market a lot of the tech companies, a lot of the unicorn fintechs, a lot of the upstart fintechs coming up with business propositions that are much more relevant to the digital savvy natives out there who are hungry for kind of great experiences that they can get access to very quickly. And we can actually use the open banking framework to collaborate with the likes of fintechs to develop jointly those propositions, share data, and then surface them quickly to the market. So I think in terms of the opportunity, there is great opportunity if banks embrace this as a new way of working. It's embedded top down in the organization, and the organization gets behind it. I think there's been some comments around culture is a major stifler to innovation, and I think that's another kind of factor. Traditional banks with their kind of high walls around security, everything is kind of held very securely within the organization because it's a regulated entity. It's a huge mindset change moving away from that. So actually being comfortable and making customers comfortable around collaboration and sharing of information is probably one of the other kind of big factors that we need to look at as we kind of open up our system, our ecosystem in terms of fintech and other third parties partnering together. So I think that whole value chain piece is something that we're moving away from traditional channels. We're moving into new ways that we can partner and ultimately be that financial services layer that will probably put organizations like banks in a new place versus being legacy and others overtaking them. I think within those opportunities, there are challenges though. So ultimately, this new way of engaging and servicing capability to the market, it's opening it up to not only local but global players entering into geographies very quickly. I think the positive for consumers is that creates more variety, more competition, if it's managed properly by the governing entities. And I think that's that kind of the fostering of kind of innovation between banks and big tech and fintech and e-commerce and other regulated industries is probably going to be the secret sauce in terms of how this comes together. And I think ultimately, even EU, we're 2019, we're 3 years down a journey, and we're just starting to see kind of these new business models come together. And I think lastly, probably my last point on this would be, there's big considerations around the operating model in terms of how organizations embrace it. So there's lots of benefits around cost efficiency, getting process optimization, straight through processing, all these sorts of things that are needed to enable these sorts of services. Those tech partnerships can allow traditional banks to launch new propositions through APIs in partnership with fintechs much quicker than necessarily maybe going away and building it all themselves. And I think that creates a great opportunity. But the big issue that a lot of organizations are going through just now is how does their technology estate, their assets, allow them to manage this securely for the customer? There's governance needed. There's a lot of legacy technology, as Dr. Paolo suggested, especially in the US, that needs to be overcome before you can go on this journey. And that's a risk to the traditional banks who are not ready for it. And ultimately, they're the ones who will lose out if they don't get themselves in the right place to kind of embrace the big change that's coming. So it's a huge opportunity for the industry. I think some believe it's overhyped, but ultimately those we're seeing already, like the HSBC example with Hetel, those who have embraced it and really kind of built it into their overall ambition and strategic agenda to serve customers better are the ones who are now seeing the benefits a couple of years on. So I'm certainly excited to see how it develops in this region, in KSA and the broader GCC. So interesting times ahead.
Thank you, Grant. I really couldn't agree more. But again, the technology readiness, as you've just mentioned, is one obstacle, one challenge that we need to attend to and attend to it fast. And unfortunately, it's not a task that you undergo or carry out overnight. It may take years in certain organizations, depending on its size. Thank you, Gron. That takes me back to Paulo for that question. Paulo, how do you assess the readiness of banks in terms of technology infrastructure? And where do you think banks should start, the ones who haven't started yet working on their technological readiness to be able to partner and become active players within that ecosystem of open banking?
Well, I see banks in the region making big efforts in transition to open banking friendly technology setup. So I'm not particularly concerned about the effort that is required for key players in the region to have what it takes to run open banking frameworks. So there could be potential booster, like we said, just like open banking is about using RESTful APIs, like building up core banking is about microservices, enabling access to these services, not only for the two core areas of applications, so accounts and payments, but also other areas like trade finance and the like. But I think that as we've been discussing here, open banking also calls for bringing in a massive amount of data and being in a position to process a much bigger quantity of data than we are used to in the current setup. So this calls also for bringing in perhaps AI and leveraging on capabilities that are increasingly available on the cloud, on the public cloud. So open banking standards, in as much as they enable new business models, also call for a deeper transformation of the banking infrastructure, also rebalancing the distribution between what is on-prem and what is on cloud. And here I think that the major issue is not about like having the clarity about how to design the new architecture or having the money to fund this transformation, but it's more about having the right corporate culture to support this transformation.
Thank you very, very much. Again, that creates another question. We are talking about the corporate internal structures to support open banking. How about the generic infrastructure in the country that should be there to support open banking? I mean, open banking cannot go in, launch that open banking regulation and build it. There are other laws and regulations that need to be in place to actually support that. And there is infrastructure that has to be in place to actually support that. Data protection regulations and laws, digital identity for consumers, individual customers, those are just examples of what needs to be there to actually enable an open banking initiative to make sure it is successful. Thank you very much, Paulo. Now, we are going to close with one point in there that we need to attend to and in details. Open banking is all about data. So Ellis, how should we as banks actually tackle that point? How can we build the right data infrastructure within organizations that can actually produce that meaningful business intelligence that can drive banking operations, decisioning, customer acquisition, and customer servicing?
Yeah, I think this is very important to build the data governance in a bank, because the compliance, regulation, and the risk management, that's very important. So you have to upgrade your GRC framework to be a digital GRC framework. Why is that? Because when we adopt migration to the cloud, adopt the AI technology, and also have the open API architecture, that means your infrastructure is totally changed. is changing from the centralized management in your data center to be the cloud. So you have to upgrade your GRC framework to be the digital GRC framework. Think about, you have a new challenge after you upgrade to the cloud. The first is regulation compliance from the cloud, for the cloud, and the privacy requirement, data privacy, and the cyber security. And also you have the customer protection, because when you open the banking, integrate the most end-to-end service, how you to protect the customer, protect the customer for data exchange. So that is the new challenge for that. So you have to build very robust the governance, the framework to make sure the first, put all of the necessary data in one place. The second, you have to build the governance, the mechanism on top of your data and organize it. When you have the data in our assets, you have to follow your rules to have the record, then you can trace back. Otherwise, you will be very disaster, because when your service run on the cloud, that means the service running everywhere. So you have to build very robust the data structure with the government framework to organize your data with the IAM access control before you run the data service. That is very, very important. After we provide a more flexible business model, for example, subscription-based, pay by use, sign a contract, and you have the more flexible business model to your client, then that is very important to how you to management all of the service by the data report, by the data usage, by the data exchange. That's what we call a data modernization. That is you have to build all of the control rule into your digital framework, not just have the Hadoop to put the data into your database. That is not enough. You have to build a digital GRC framework into your data process and the business logic into your data process. That is very important, not just technology. You have to think about the compliance, risk management, and regulation into your business process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Thank you, gentlemen. Paulo had to actually leave. This has been a really, really interesting and informative. I know that our participants have enjoyed it as much as I did being in here with you today. Thank you very much for putting the time into this. And I would like to also thank the organizing team for giving us that opportunity and building that platform where we could discuss and share all the wonderful, wonderful inputs with our participants. And here is to you, Rahma.
Thank you so much, Noha. And thank you to our amazing panelists, Mr. Ellis, Mr. Grant, Mr. Hetal, and Dr. Paulo for the amazing insights shared through this panel, and to Noha for beautifully steering the discussion through, touching upon the right points. All right, now before we close the summit, as we have neared the end of the Open Banking Ecosystem Summit, as we conclude, I would now like to call upon the event producer, Sarah Bent, to give the closing remarks for the day. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Roma. So as Series A of the Open Banking Summit, which focused on the GCC region as a whole, comes to a conclusion, we are delighted our efforts to enable successful open banking adoption and implementation in the region have been reciprocated and have proven fruitful. The keynote, starting with the keynote from UK's open banking implementation entity, it took us through the rollout of the open banking regulation in the UK, the challenges they faced, and the progress they have made so far. We had the panel focusing on the regulatory framework for the GCC, the legislations and standards that needs to be in place to enable smooth adoption. In the exclusive CEOs panel, we saw CEOs from a global bank, Standard Chartered, a prominent regional bank, Commercial Bank of Dubai, and a regional neobank, SAN, discuss about the opportunities of open banking for the region's financial sector. on developing an open banking ecosystem and how they plan to ride the wave. We also heard from the Chief Information Officer of Emirates NBD, who spearheaded the organization's Dirham 1 billion digital transformation drive, which is among the biggest digital technology transformations worldwide, on how Emirates NBD plans to gain first mover advantage in the region by positioning correctly to leverage on the opportunities open banking has to offer. We concluded a day of insightful discussions by bringing in best practices from world over, from the early adopters of open banking in the UK and other markets through another brilliant panel we just concluded. We have had highly insightful series of discussions today. We genuinely hope you found it constructive and value-adding. Now, in order to improve our services, please provide us with your feedback. You can find the feedback form in the chat window below. Also, we're going to be having another very interesting day of interesting series of discussions at the Open Banking KSA Summit, which is taking place day after tomorrow on Wednesday, 23rd of June. So we are exclusively and completely focusing on the Saudi market as SAMA aims to launch the open banking regulation by early 2022. So please make sure you register for the Open Banking KSA Summit. You can find the registration form in the chat window below. See you in 2 days. Thank you so much. Thank you.